Hello everyone, and welcome back to Midnight Horror. I know many of you use these videos to fall asleep, so before you drift off, I'd love it if you could leave a comment letting me know where you're listening from around the world. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe if you're enjoying the video. Story 1. The factory loomed in the distance, its skeletal remains barely holding together against the passage of time. Windows were shattered, and rust clung to the steel framework like a disease. I had always been drawn to places like this, remnants of a forgotten era, whispering secrets to those who dared to listen. The air smelled of damp concrete and oil, a lingering scent of industry long since abandoned. I stepped through the broken doorway, my footsteps echoing in the vast emptiness. The walls were lined with rusted machinery, their gears frozen in place, waiting for a command that would never come. A faint breeze moved through the open spaces, carrying the scent of decay and something metallic. Dust swirled around me as I moved deeper into the factory's belly. The main floor stretched before me, a graveyard of forgotten equipment. Large conveyor belts stood motionless, covered in years of grime and dirt. Chains hung from the ceiling, swaying slightly as if disturbed by an unseen presence. I moved cautiously, scanning the area for anything of interest. A door at the far end of the room caught my attention, its wood warped and splintered with age. I pushed it open, revealing a narrow hallway lined with offices, their doors barely hanging on their hinges. The dim light filtering through broken windows gave everything a sepia tint, frozen in time. The silence felt unnatural, pressing against my ears like cotton. I stepped into the first office, my eyes scanning the scattered remains of paperwork and broken furniture. A desk sat against the far wall, its surface covered in yellow documents and faded photographs. Dust covered everything, disturbed only by my presence. My fingers brushed over the edges of the papers as I flipped through them. Names, dates, and technical schematics filled the pages, detailing operations that had long ceased. I wasn't sure what I was looking for, only that something about this place felt significant. As I shuffled through the papers, my breath caught in my throat. There, in the middle of the pile, was a document with my name on it. My pulse quickened as I picked up the paper, my fingers trembling slightly. The ink was faded but legible, my name printed in bold letters at the top. Below it, a handwritten note in deep red ink read, "We've been waiting for you." A chill ran down my spine as I turned the paper over, searching for more. There was nothing else, no explanation, no signature, just those 5 words. My eyes darted around the room, suddenly hyper-aware of the stillness that surrounded me. The dust in the air seemed heavier now, clinging to my skin like a warning. My mind scrambled for a rational explanation, but none came. A sudden creak echoed from the hallway, the unmistakable sound of a footstep. I froze, my grip tightening on the paper as I strained to listen. The air had shifted, charged with something unseen yet undeniably present. I wasn't alone. My gaze flicked to the doorway, but there was nothing but darkness beyond it. I slowly set the paper back down, my movements careful, deliberate. The factory had been abandoned for decades, there shouldn't have been anyone here. Yet the weight of unseen eyes pressed against my back. I stepped out into the hallway, my breath shallow and controlled. The air was thick, heavy with something unspoken, and the walls seemed to close in around me. My footsteps felt too loud, each one an invitation for whatever lurked in the shadows. I needed to leave. As I turned to head back toward the main floor, another noise stopped me cold. It was the sound of shuffling paper, coming from the office I had just left. My heart hammered against my ribs as I spun around, expecting to see movement. But the room was exactly as I had left it. The paper with my name on it was gone. The surface of the desk was undisturbed, as if I had never touched it at all. My breathing turned shallow, my skin crawling with unease. Something was playing with me. A faint whisper drifted through the air, too soft to make out words. It sent a sharp jolt of fear through my spine, my fight or flight instincts screaming for me to run. I took a step back, then another, before turning and walking swiftly toward the exit. I didn't care about silence anymore, I just needed to get out. The hallway stretched longer than I remembered, the doors on either side seeming closer than before. My pace quickened, my pulse a rapid drum in my ears. Every shadow felt alive, every flicker of movement a lurking presence just beyond my sight. The factory wasn't empty. A metallic clang rang out behind me, followed by the unmistakable sound of a chair scraping against the floor. I broke into a run, my breath coming in sharp gasps. The entrance was close, the broken doorway a beacon of escape. The factory groaned around me, as if protesting my departure. Just as I reached the threshold, a final sound made my blood turn to ice. A voice, low and distorted, whispered my name from somewhere deep within the building. It wasn't an echo. It wasn't a trick of the wind. It was real. I stumbled into the open air, the gray sky above feeling almost too bright after the darkness inside. My chest heaved, my hands shaking as I forced myself to keep walking. I didn't look back. I didn't want to see what had been waiting for me. The factory stood behind me, silent once more, its secrets buried in rust and decay. But I knew the truth now: some places were never truly abandoned. Some places remembered. And some things waited, patiently, for those who were meant to find them. Story 2. The house stood deep in the woods, hidden beneath a canopy of trees that blocked out most of the daylight. Its roof sagged slightly, the wooden walls covered in ivy, yet the windows remained intact. I had stumbled upon it by accident while hiking, drawn by the eerie silence surrounding it. Something about the place felt off, but curiosity got the better of me. I stepped onto the porch, the old boards creaking beneath my weight. The door was slightly ajar, revealing a dim interior untouched by time. Dust motes swirled in the air as I pushed it open, my breath catching at the sight inside. Furniture still sat in place, as if the house had only recently been abandoned. A wooden table with 2 chairs stood in the center of the room, a thin layer of dust covering the surface. A rocking chair faced the window, motionless despite the faint breeze sneaking through the cracks. The place smelled faintly of wood and something else, something that sent a shiver down my spine. It wasn't the scent of decay or rot, but rather something familiar, something unsettlingly fresh. I moved further inside, my footsteps echoing softly. A hallway stretched toward the back, leading to what I assumed were bedrooms. But it was the kitchen that caught my attention. The appliances were old, their surfaces dulled with age, yet the fridge hummed softly in the quiet. That alone didn't make sense. The house had no visible power lines, no signs of recent habitation. I hesitated before gripping the fridge handle, my pulse quickening. With a slow breath, I pulled it open, and the cool air rushed against my skin. The shelves were mostly empty, except for a single item sitting in the center. A sandwich, wrapped neatly in plastic, untouched. My stomach twisted at the sight. The bread looked fresh, the deli meat inside still pink, as if someone had just made it. The plastic wrap was clean, showing no signs of age or tampering. I reached out but stopped short, an uneasy feeling creeping over me. Someone had been here recently enough to leave food. A sudden noise made me jolt, my heart slamming against my ribs. It came from the hallway, a soft creak, like a footstep shifting on an old floorboard. I froze, listening, my breath shallow. The house had been silent before, and now I wasn't so sure I was alone. I carefully shut the fridge, swallowing hard as I turned my head toward the hallway. Shadows stretched along the walls, shifting slightly as the light outside dimmed. I debated calling out, but something in me resisted the idea. Instead, I took a slow step back, trying to control my breathing. The silence stretched, thick and suffocating. Then another sound, this time a faint rustling like fabric brushing against wood. My skin prickled as I scanned the room, searching for another exit. The front door was behind me, but the thought of turning my back on that hallway sent a chill down my spine. I took another step back, my eyes locked on the darkness beyond the kitchen. The air felt heavier now, charged with something unseen. My instinct screamed at me to leave, but I hesitated, my mind racing with possibilities. Had someone been living here, watching me? Or had I just wandered into something I wasn't meant to see? Then, just as I was about to move, the fridge door creaked open behind me. The breath caught in my throat as I whipped around. The door was ajar again, the sandwich still sitting in place, untouched. But something felt different. The cold air seeped out in an unnatural way, the hum of the fridge suddenly louder, almost distorted. My pulse pounded as I took another step back, my body tensed. A low whisper broke the silence. It came from behind me, from the hallway. The sound was barely audible, like a breath against my ear. My entire body went rigid as I turned my head slowly, my hands clenching into fists. Nothing was there. The hallway remained empty, the shadows unmoving. But I wasn't imagining it. The feeling of being watched was unbearable now, pressing down on me with an intensity that made my skin crawl. I had overstayed my welcome. I moved quickly, making my way toward the front door without looking back. My heart pounded as I stepped onto the porch, the weight of the house still lingering behind me. The air outside felt different, lighter, as if I had stepped out of something unnatural. I didn't stop until I was deep into the woods, putting as much distance between myself and the house as possible. My mind raced with what I had seen, with what I had felt. The fridge still working, the fresh sandwich, the whisper in the empty house. It didn't make sense. None of it did. It did. When I finally reached my car, I hesitated before looking back. Through the gaps in the trees, the house still stood, silent and waiting. The thought sent a shiver through me, and I forced myself to turn away. As I started the engine, a single thought lingered in my mind. Who had been waiting for me to find that sandwich? Story 3. The school had been abandoned for decades, left to decay under layers of dust and time. Its windows were shattered, doors unhinged, and the once pristine hallways were now covered in graffiti and debris. I had heard stories about it growing up, rumors of strange occurrences, echoes of voices long gone. Curiosity had always lingered in the back of my mind, and on this particular evening I finally gave in to the urge to explore. Pushing open the rusted front doors, I stepped inside, my footsteps echoing through the empty corridors. The air was thick with the scent of mildew and old paper, the walls lined with peeling paint and forgotten memories. Lockers stood against the walls, their doors dented and rusted, some hanging open like gaping mouths. The silence was suffocating, broken only by the occasional creak of the settling building. I wandered deeper, running my fingers along the dusty surfaces of desks and bulletin boards. Old class schedules and faded posters clung stubbornly to the walls, their messages lost to time. A faint breeze whispered through the broken windows, stirring papers that had long been untouched. It felt as though the school was holding its breath, waiting. As I moved down the hallway, a single locker caught my attention. Unlike the others, its door was shut tight, its surface unmarked by graffiti or rust. Something about it felt out of place, as if it had been untouched while the rest of the school crumbled around it. Without thinking, I reached out and pulled it open. Inside, there was only one thing: a folded letter, yellowed with age, resting on the empty metal shelf. My breath caught in my throat as I picked it up, my fingers brushing against the brittle paper. The ink had faded, but the name written across the front was unmistakable. It was my name. A chill crawled down my spine as I turned the letter over, my pulse quickening. The date written in the corner stopped me cold years before I was even born. My hands trembled as I unfolded it, my mind racing with questions. How was this possible? Who had written it? The message inside was brief, written in an elegant, flowing script. The words sent a shiver through my entire body, an eerie sense of familiarity settling in my chest. You were always meant to find this. Leave now, before it's too late. My heartbeat pounded in my ears as I read the words over and over. I glanced around, suddenly feeling exposed, as if unseen eyes were watching me from the darkened corners of the school. The air felt heavier, the silence more oppressive. My instinct screamed at me to leave, but I couldn't move, my mind caught in a whirlwind of confusion and fear. Forcing myself to breathe, I carefully folded the letter and slipped it into my pocket. I needed answers, but I also needed to get out of there. Turning on my heel, I made my way back toward the entrance, my pace quickening with each step. The hallway seemed longer now, stretching endlessly ahead of me. As I passed by the classrooms, I swore I heard something, a faint rustling, like footsteps echoing just behind me. I stopped, holding my breath, listening. The sound ceased immediately, swallowed by the silence. My skin prickled with unease, and I resumed walking, refusing to look back. The front doors loomed ahead, slightly ajar just as I had left them. Relief washed over me as I reached for the handle, but then another sound. This time it was unmistakable. A locker door slamming shut somewhere deep within the school. My entire body tensed, my hand frozen in place. I didn't wait to find out what had caused it. Yanking the door open, I stepped outside, inhaling the crisp evening air, as though I had been holding my breath for hours. The fading sunlight painted the decaying exterior of the school in hues of orange and gold, making it seem almost peaceful. But I knew better. As I walked away, my mind refused to settle. The letter burned in my pocket, its message looping endlessly in my thoughts. Someone had known I would come here. Someone had written those words, warning me before I even existed. The thought sent a shudder through me, but I couldn't shake the nagging feeling that this wasn't over. That night, I placed the letter on my desk, staring at it under the glow of my lamp. The paper was fragile, the ink barely legible, but the handwriting was hauntingly familiar. I had seen it before somewhere, sometime. I rifled through old journals and family records, searching for any clue. Then I found it. An old box tucked away in my grandmother's attic, filled with letters from generations past. As I sifted through them, my breath caught. There, among the yellowed pages, was the same handwriting, the same signature at the bottom. It belonged to my grandmother. She had died when I was young, leaving behind a legacy of secrets and whispered warnings. My hands trembled as I read her old letters, each one hinting at something unspoken, something left unfinished. Had she known about the school? Had she known about me? I had to go back. The next day, I returned to the school, the weight of the letter pressing against my chest. The building stood as silent as before, its doors still ajar, as if waiting for me. I stepped inside, retracing my steps to the locker, my heartbeat loud in my ears. But the locker was empty. The letter was gone, as if it had never existed. A deep unease settled in my gut, my thoughts spiraling into uncertainty. Had I imagined it? Had the school itself played some kind of trick on me? As I turned to leave, my gaze caught something on the floor. A single slip of paper, fresh and unedged, stark against the dusty tile. Slowly, I bent down and picked it up, my fingers gripping it tightly as I read the single sentence scrawled in the familiar handwriting. "You shouldn't have come back." A cold shiver ran down my spine as I looked around, my breath catching in my throat. The hallway stretched before me, silent and empty, but somehow I knew I wasn't alone. Story 4. The hospital stood at the edge of town, its windows shattered, its walls streaked with years of neglect. I had heard stories about it, whispers of strange occurrences, of lights flickering in the night, despite no electricity running through the building. It was the kind of place people dared each other to enter but never actually did. I wasn't one to believe in ghost stories, but I was drawn to abandoned places, and this hospital was too tempting to resist. Stepping inside, I was immediately hit by the stale scent of decay and mold. The floor was littered with debris, broken glass, discarded medical papers, rusted equipment long forgotten. My flashlight's beam cut through the darkness, illuminating the eerie remnants of what had once been a place meant for healing. The silence was absolute, broken only by the occasional drip of water from the ceiling. I moved cautiously down the main hallway, my footsteps echoing against the cracked tiles. The rooms I passed were empty shells, their contents either stolen or rotted away with time. A few hospital beds remained, their mattresses torn, their metal frames rusting. Old wheelchairs sat abandoned in corners, their wheels locked in place, as if waiting for a patient who would never return. Deeper inside, I found what appeared to be a nurse's station. The counter was covered in dust, the chairs pushed back as though the staff had left in a hurry. Filing cabinets stood with their drawers open, patient charts spilling onto the floor. I crouched down, running my fingers over the faded names on the folders. Most were too old to be of any interest, their ink smudged, their pages brittle. But then I saw a medical chart that looked different from the rest. The paper was crisp, the ink still fresh, as if it had been filled out recently. My stomach twisted as I lifted it, my eyes scanning the top of the page. My name was written there, clear as day. I froze, my breath catching in my throat. My mind raced for an explanation, but none made sense. I had never been a patient here. This hospital had been abandoned for years, long before I was even born. I flipped through the pages, my pulse pounding as I read the details. The chart listed my age, my weight, my blood type, details that were disturbingly accurate. Worse, the most recent entry was time-stamped with today's date. A chill crawled up my spine as I looked around, suddenly feeling exposed. I had been alone when I entered. No one else had been here. At least, that's what I had thought. The silence no longer felt empty, it felt watchful. My grip tightened on the paper as I turned in a slow circle, scanning the darkness for any sign of movement. Something creaked down the hall. My body stiffened, every instinct screaming at me to run. The sound had come from one of the patient rooms just beyond the nurse's station. I swallowed hard, forcing myself to move toward it, my flashlight trembling slightly in my grasp. The door was half open, the rusted hinges groaning as I nudged it further. Inside, the room was almost identical to the others except for the hospital bed in the center. The sheets were pristine, stark white against the gloom. The sight of them sent another wave of unease through me. Every other bed in this place had been covered in dust, but this one looked freshly made, as if it were waiting. My fingers tightened around the chart, my skin cold with dread. The last page had a handwritten note scrawled at the bottom, its ink smeared as though someone had written it in haste. Admitted for observation. Condition unknown. Patient uncooperative. My breath came in short, uneven bursts. Someone had written this. Someone who had been here moments ago. A noise behind me made my blood run cold. It wasn't a creak this time, it was a breath. I spun around, my flashlight cutting through the shadows, but there was nothing. The hallway was empty. The silence stretched unbearably, pressing down on my chest. I took a shaky step backward, bumping into the hospital bed. Then the overhead lights flickered on. I gasped, my heart slamming against my ribs. The entire hospital had been without power. There was no reason for the lights to work. Yet here they were, buzzing weakly, casting sickly yellow light down the hallway. The air felt heavier now, thick with something unseen. My fingers trembled as I clutched the chart to my chest. A metallic clatter echoed from down the hall. My breath hitched as I turned, my flashlight shaking in my grip. A gurney had rolled out from one of the rooms, its wheels squeaking against the tile. It stopped abruptly, as if someone had pushed it and let go. I took a step back, my entire body screaming at me to leave. Then I heard a voice, faint and rasping, from somewhere beyond the hallway. "You shouldn't be here." Panic seized my limbs and I bolted. The flashlight bounced wildly as I ran, my breath coming in sharp gasps. The walls blurred past me, the lights above flickering erratically. Doors slammed shut on their own, the echoes chasing me as I sprinted toward the exit. My foot caught on debris and I stumbled, crashing hard against the floor. The medical charts slipped from my fingers, scattering papers around me. I scrambled to grab it, but as I did, I noticed something horrifying. The handwriting on the last note was changing right before my eyes. New words were scrawling themselves in ink, as if an invisible hand were writing them. Discharge status, patient failed to escape. Terror flooded my veins. I left the papers behind and forced myself up, my legs burning as I pushed forward. The entrance was just ahead, the doors still propped open as I had left them. I threw myself through the doorway, crashing onto the pavement outside. The moment my feet hit the ground, the lights inside flickered off. The hospital was dark again, silent, as if nothing had ever happened. My chest heaved as I stumbled back, my eyes locked on the empty doorway. Then, from somewhere deep inside, I heard the faint click of a pen against paper. Story 5. The house stood at the edge of the woods, its darkened windows staring blankly out at the overgrown yard. The air around it was thick with something unspoken, an invisible weight pressing down as I stepped onto the sagging porch. The wood groaned beneath my feet, as if the house itself was protesting my presence. Pushing the door open, I was met with the scent of dust, rotting wood, and something faintly metallic. The air inside was heavy, stagnant, as if no one had disturbed it for decades. My flashlight cut through the darkness, revealing tattered wallpaper curling at the edges and furniture draped in white sheets, frozen in time. I took a few cautious steps inside, my boots stirring up clouds of dust. The silence was absolute, swallowing even the sound of my own breath. But then, just as I was about to move deeper, I heard the slow, rhythmic ticking of a clock. The sound echoed through the house, steady and deliberate. I followed it, my heartbeat quickening as the ticking grew louder. At the end of the hallway stood a massive grandfather clock, its wooden frame untouched by dust, its brass pendulum swaying in perfect rhythm. I stepped closer, my pulse pounding in my ears. With each beat of my heart, the clock ticked in unison, as if it was measuring my very existence. My fingers brushed against the smooth wood, feeling a faint vibration beneath the surface, like something alive beneath the casing. The longer I stood there, the more I became aware of the house around me. The air grew colder, the silence pressing in, thick and watchful. It was as if the house had awakened, responding to my intrusion with something unseen but undeniably present. A soft creak came from upstairs, a sound too deliberate to be the house settling. My breath hitched as I turned my gaze toward the staircase, its steps vanishing into darkness. The logical part of me said it was nothing, but deep down I knew I was not alone. I hesitated before climbing the stairs, my flashlight trembling slightly in my grip. Each step groaned beneath me, the sound too loud, too exposed in the quiet. At the top, a long hallway stretched out, doors standing ajar like waiting mouths. I moved forward, peering into each room, my nerves stretched thin. A bedroom sat untouched, a bed neatly made as if expecting someone to return. A child's room held a rocking chair, its seat swaying slightly as if disturbed moments before. Then I reached the last door, slightly more open than the rest. Something about it felt wrong, an unspoken warning humming in my bones. I pushed it open, revealing a study filled with books, papers scattered across the desk as if abandoned in a hurry. At the center of the desk sat a small, ornate pocket watch, its face cracked, its hands moving in perfect sync with the ticking downstairs. My stomach twisted as I picked it up, the metal ice cold against my skin. The second hand stuttered for a fraction of a second, then resumed, perfectly aligned with my pulse. A sharp noise cut through the silence, a whisper, too soft to catch but close enough to make my skin crawl. I spun around, my flashlight sweeping the room, but there was no one there. Yet the presence pressed in around me, heavier now, closer. The grandfather clock downstairs let out a deep chime, the sound vibrating through the walls. My grip on the pocket watch tightened as I backed toward the door, my breathing shallow. The air thickened, and for the first time I could feel it, not just a presence, but something standing just beyond my sight. I turned and bolted, the pocket watch still clutched in my hand. My footsteps thundered down the stairs, the ticking growing louder, faster, no longer matching my heartbeat but racing ahead of it. The moment I reached the front door, the clock let out one final, deafening chime. The air shifted and suddenly everything went silent. The ticking stopped, the weight in the air lifted, and the house returned to its previous stillness. I staggered onto the porch, gasping for breath, my hands trembling as I looked back inside. The grandfather clock stood motionless, its pendulum still, its face blank. The pocket watch in my hand was cold and unmoving, the glass cracked even further. Whatever had been there, whatever had watched me, had withdrawn for now. I didn't look back as I left, the weight of the encounter settling deep in my bones. The house had let me go, but I knew it hadn't forgotten me. And as I walked away, the faintest sound of ticking echoed in the wind, following me into the night. Story 6. The amusement park had been abandoned for years, left to rot as nature slowly reclaimed it. Vines crawled over rusting roller coasters, and broken signs dangled from their posts, swaying in the wind. The smell of damp wood and rust filled the air, mingling with the faintest hint of something sweet, like old cotton candy. I had always wanted to see the place for myself, and under the cover of dusk I finally got my chance. I stepped past the broken gate, my flashlight cutting through the growing darkness. The park was eerily silent except for the occasional creak of metal shifting in the wind. Faded posters still clung to the walls of the ticket booth, their smiling characters cracked and peeling. The turnstiles were frozen in place, coated in rust, as if waiting for customers who would never return. Walking deeper into the park, I passed rows of empty food stands and toppled trash cans, their contents long scattered. A carousel stood motionless in the distance, its horses frozen in mid-gallop, their eyes dull and lifeless. The sight sent a shiver down my spine. but I kept moving, drawn by the mystery of what lay further in. That's when I saw it. At the center of the park, a single ride still had its lights on. Bright bulbs flickered weakly along the edges of a Ferris wheel, their glow barely cutting through the darkness. My pulse quickened as I realized there was no logical reason for them to be working. The power had been shut off years ago, and the rest of the park was swallowed in shadow. I approached cautiously, my footsteps muffled by the thick layer of dirt and leaves covering the pavement. The Ferris wheel wasn't moving, but the seats swayed slightly, creaking softly in the breeze. That's when I noticed the figure. Someone was sitting in one of the seats, perfectly still, staring directly at me. My breath hitched, and I stopped in my tracks. The figure didn't move, didn't acknowledge me in any way. Their posture was stiff, their head tilted slightly as if observing me. I raised my flashlight, the beam cutting across the rusted metal, illuminating the seat. The person was pale, unnaturally so, and their clothes were tattered and worn, as if they had been sitting there for years. A gust of wind rushed through the park, rattling the empty rides and sending a metallic groan through the air. I swallowed hard, forcing myself to step closer. My instinct screamed at me to turn back, to leave the park, and never return, but something about the figure held me in place. It wasn't just the way they sat so still, it was the way their eyes never left me. I called out, my voice barely above a whisper. "Hey, are you okay?" No response. The silence stretched on, pressing against my ears like a weight. I took another hesitant step forward, the gravel crunching under my feet. The air smelled heavier now, like rust and something stale, something old. I felt the prickle of unease creep up my spine as I realized that despite the wind, the figure's clothes weren't moving. The lights on the Ferris wheel flickered again, casting shifting shadows across the park. Then, in the brief moment of darkness before they reignited, the figure disappeared. My chest tightened, and I swung my flashlight wildly across the seats, searching for any sign of movement. But the seat where they had been sitting was empty. I took a shaky step back, my mind racing to make sense of what I had just seen. There was nowhere they could have gone in the split second the lights went out. The air around me felt colder now, the wind carrying a whisper that sounded almost like laughter. A metallic clank echoed through the park, making me jump. I turned toward the source of the noise, my flashlight trembling in my grip. The carousel was moving. Its rusted gears groaned as the platform slowly spun, the horses rising and falling in jerky, uneven movements. The music that played was warped, the notes stretched and twisted into something unrecognizable. My stomach churned as I realized I wasn't alone. Shadows flickered between the carousel horses, shifting unnaturally as if something unseen was moving through them. I took a step back, and the laughter came again, closer this time, curling around me like a breath against my neck. I turned and ran. My footsteps echoed against the cracked pavement as I sprinted toward the exit, my heart hammering in my chest. The park felt endless, the pathway stretching on longer than I remembered, twisting in ways that didn't make sense. Every turn I took seemed to lead me deeper inside, the once familiar landmarks shifting, distorting. Panting, I forced myself to stop, trying to get my bearings. The Ferris wheel still loomed in the distance, its lights flickering like a dying heartbeat. I wasn't any closer to the exit. I had been running in circles. A slow, deliberate creak sounded behind me, and I turned just in time to see one of the carousel horses stop mid-motion, its head snapping in my direction. My breath caught in my throat. The wind had died completely now, the park locked in absolute silence. Then, just beyond the carousel, I saw them. Figures, standing between the rides, half hidden in the shadows, watching me, Their faces were pale, their eyes hollow and unblinking. I recognized the tattered clothes, the stiff posture. They were like the figure I had seen on the Ferris wheel, all of them frozen in place, waiting. My legs finally obeyed, and I ran again, pushing myself harder than before. The figures didn't follow, but I could feel them watching. I could hear the carousel still turning, the warped music distorting into something almost human. My breath burned in my lungs as I burst through the broken gates, my body crashing against the cold pavement outside. The air was different here, clearer, lighter. The oppressive weight that had clung to me inside the park was gone. I scrambled to my feet, my hands shaking as I looked back. The park was still, the lights on the Ferris wheel gone. It was as if nothing had ever been there, as if the place had been as abandoned as it should have been. But I knew better. I turned away, vowing never to return. Yet, as I walked away, I swore I heard it one last time. That faint, distorted laughter drifting through the night. Story 7. The prison loomed on the outskirts of town, its crumbling stone walls covered in ivy and years of neglect. The main gate was rusted shut, but a portion of the fence had been torn away, leaving just enough space for me to slip inside. The air smelled of damp concrete and mildew, the scent of long-forgotten misery clinging to every surface. As I stepped into the main courtyard, the silence was suffocating, broken only by the occasional creak of metal shifting in the wind. Cells lined the walls, their iron bars rusted and warped with time. Some doors hung open, their interiors dark and unwelcoming, while others remained sealed shut, their locks covered in dust. A few had personal belongings left behind: old shoes, torn bedding, a rusted metal cup still resting on the floor. It was as if the prisoners had vanished overnight, leaving only echoes of their existence behind. The further I walked, the heavier the atmosphere became. Graffiti covered some of the walls, angry messages scrawled in faded paint, warnings I couldn't fully decipher. A few doors bore deep gouges, like someone had desperately tried to claw their way out. The air was stale, thick with dust and the weight of something unseen. Despite the emptiness, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. I moved toward the administrative wing where the warden's office was located. The door was slightly ajar, its hinges creaking as I pushed it open. The room was surprisingly intact, unlike the rest of the prison. A massive wooden desk stood in the center, its surface covered in papers and old ledgers. A filing cabinet leaned against the wall, its drawers partially open, revealing yellow documents inside. A large map was spread out across the desk, crisp and detailed, as if it had been placed there recently. My eyes scanned the blueprint of the prison, taking in the layout of the cell blocks, the cafeteria, and the solitary confinement wing. Then I noticed something strange. Certain areas were marked in red ink, circled and annotated with notes. My stomach tightened when I saw my name written in the margins. I leaned in closer, my fingers tracing the red markings. The notes indicated paths through the prison, leading to specific rooms and corridors. Each section was labeled with unsettling detail: sleeping quarters, observation area, restricted access. The handwriting was neat, deliberate, and the ink looked fresh, as if someone had been planning something for me. A noise outside the office made me freeze. It was faint, like the shuffle of footsteps against concrete, distant but unmistakable. I held my breath, straining to listen, but the sound had already faded. My pulse hammered in my ears as I turned back to the map, my mind racing. Someone had been here, and not long ago. I stepped away from the desk, suddenly feeling exposed. The walls of the office seemed to close in, the air pressing down on me. I needed to leave, but curiosity kept me rooted in place. The notes on the map were too precise, too intentional. Whoever had left this behind had done so with a purpose, and that purpose involved me. The filing cabinet caught my eye again, and I reached for one of the half-open drawers. Inside were documents labeled with names and numbers, records of past inmates. Flipping through them, I found mugshots, disciplinary reports, medical evaluations. Then, buried beneath the stack, I found something that stopped me cold, a file with my name on it. I pulled it out, my hands trembling as I flipped it open. Inside were pages detailing my movements, places I had visited, even recent events from my life. Notes about where I worked, where I lived, written in that same precise handwriting. My stomach churned as I realized this wasn't an old record. This was something new. Someone had been keeping track of me. The sound of something heavy scraping against the floor sent a shock of fear through me. I spun toward the door, but there was nothing there, just the dimly lit hallway stretching into darkness. The air was thick with silence, but I knew I wasn't alone. Every instinct screamed for me to run, but my legs refused to move. A flicker of movement in my peripheral vision made my breath hitch. I turned sharply, my eyes scanning the shadows, but whatever had been there was already gone. The prison felt different now, like it was awake, aware of my presence. I clenched my fists, forcing myself to breathe, to think. Staying here was a mistake. I stepped out of the office, my heartbeat hammering against my ribs. The hallway felt longer than before, stretching endlessly ahead of me. Every cell door, every darkened corner felt like a trap, waiting to spring. My footsteps echoed unnaturally loud, each one swallowed by the suffocating quiet of the prison. Then, from somewhere behind me, I heard another sound, closer this time. A slow, deliberate drag of something heavy against the floor. The noise sent a bolt of fear through me, and I picked up my pace, forcing myself to move faster. Whatever was in here with me, it wasn't trying to hide anymore. I turned a corner, heading for the exit, but something stopped me in my tracks. A single light flickered ahead, illuminating a row of freshly carved words on the wall. The message was simple, but it sent a chill through my entire body. You're exactly where you're supposed to be. My breath caught in my throat as I took a step back, my mind racing. The message wasn't old, the edges of the carved letters still sharp. Someone had left this for me. My hands clenched into fists as I forced myself to turn away, to focus on getting out. But deep inside, I knew the truth. I had walked into a trap. A sudden rush of air behind me made my skin crawl. I didn't turn. I didn't want to see. I broke into a sprint, my feet slamming against the cracked floor, the exit looming in the distance. The walls blurred past me, the oppressive silence broken only by my own ragged breathing. As I reached the outer gate, I didn't dare slow down. My hands fumbled as I squeezed through the torn fence, the jagged metal slicing against my arm. Pain flared, but I barely noticed. I stumbled onto the overgrown path, my breath coming in desperate gasps as I put as much distance between myself and the prison as possible. When I finally reached my car, I hesitated only long enough to glance back. The prison stood as silent as before, its darkened halls hiding whatever had been watching me. The map, the file, the message on the wall, it had all been for me. And whoever had left it wasn't done yet. I had escaped, but I knew deep down that this wasn't over. Someone had been expecting me, and soon they would come looking. Story 8. The factory stood at the edge of town, forgotten and decaying under years of neglect. Rust clung to the steel beams, and shattered windows allowed the wind to whistle through the hollow shell. Graffiti covered the walls, layers of paint marking the years since it had been abandoned. Despite its state, something about it still felt alive, as if the building had been waiting for someone to return. I pushed open the heavy metal door, its hinges groaning in protest. The scent of dust and oil filled my lungs, a strange mixture of decay and something oddly fresh. The floor was littered with debris, broken glass, scraps of metal, and old papers curled at the edges. My footsteps echoed in the vast space, swallowed quickly by the cavernous silence. As I stepped further inside, the air seemed to shift, the stillness disturbed by something unseen. The machinery, rusted and covered in grime, stood like forgotten monuments in the dim light. Belts hung loose from pulleys, gears frozen in time, yet there was an unsettling sense of potential energy in them. It was as if they were waiting for the right moment to move again. Then, without warning, a deep hum vibrated through the walls, low and mechanical. My breath hitched as I turned toward the source, my pulse hammering in my ears. The sound wasn't distant, it was coming from the machinery itself. The conveyor belts trembled, gears groaned to life, and the factory began to breathe again. I took a cautious step back, my mind racing for an explanation. There was no power here, no workers, no maintenance, nothing that could explain the sudden resurrection of the machines. Yet, as I watched, the lights flickered weakly, casting erratic shadows against the walls. The factory wasn't dead, it had only been asleep. A sharp clang echoed from deeper within, and I whipped my head toward the sound. My flashlight beam caught the edge of movement, but by the time I focused, whatever had been there was gone. The feeling of being watched crawled up my spine, growing heavier with each passing second. I was no longer sure if I was alone. The hum deepened, vibrating through the floor beneath my boots. I stepped carefully, my heart pounding as I navigated past a massive press machine that had somehow begun its slow, rhythmic cycle. Steam hissed from unseen pipes, the air growing thick with the scent of burning dust. Whatever had awakened the factory wasn't stopping, it was spreading. A door at the far end of the room stood slightly ajar, light flickering beyond it. I hesitated, torn between leaving and finding out what lay ahead. The factory had drawn me in, and now it felt as if it was leading me somewhere. My fingers trembled as I reached for the door, pushing it open with a soft creak. Beyond the threshold was a smaller room, lined with control panels and flickering monitors. Old blueprints were pinned to the walls, curling at the edges from time and neglect. Unlike the rest of the factory, this room had been recently disturbed, papers scattered across the floor, a chair overturned near a desk. Someone had been here, and not long ago. A flicker of movement in the corner of my vision sent a jolt of fear through me. I spun toward the doorway I had just entered, but nothing was there. The machinery outside continued its eerie revival, gears grinding, belts shifting. Yet the absence of footsteps told me nothing had passed through. I was certain now I wasn't alone, but whatever else was here didn't want to be seen. A sudden burst of static crackled from an old speaker mounted on the wall. The sound was sharp, grating, before dissolving into a low, garbled voice. The words were impossible to understand, distorted beyond recognition, yet the tone carried a warning. I felt my stomach twist as I realized the voice wasn't coming from the speaker, it was coming from somewhere deeper inside the factory. I backed away, my body tense, every instinct screaming at me to leave. But just as I turned to exit, the monitors flickered violently, and an image appeared on the screen. It was grainy, distorted, but unmistakable. A live feed of the factory floor, and in the center of it stood a shadowed figure, unmoving, watching. My blood ran cold as I recognized my own silhouette near the edge of the screen. The camera was live, tracking me in real time. I turned toward where the figure should have been, but the floor was empty. Yet on the monitor, it remained, standing there as if it had been watching me all along. A metallic screech tore through the air, and the lights overhead surged, buzzing with a sickly glow. The machinery rattled violently, gears spinning faster than they should, belts lurching as if in protest. Whatever had taken hold of the factory was no longer content with lurking in the shadows. It was making itself known. Panic set in as I bolted for the exit, my breath coming in ragged gasps. The factory groaned around me, the walls seeming to tremble as the machines roared to life in full force. Steam hissed from every crevice, the once dead building now pulsing with a mechanical heartbeat. The sound of clanging metal followed me, growing closer, as if something unseen was giving chase. I reached the entrance and yanked the door open, stumbling into the night air. The hum of the factory persisted, even as I put distance between myself and the building. The windows flickered with light, the machinery continuing its work despite the lack of workers. The factory had woken up, and it no longer cared who had disturbed it. As I stood at the edge of the lot, catching my breath, the final realization hit me. The figure on the monitor had never moved, never chased me, because it had never needed to. The factory itself had been watching, waiting, and now it had seen me. Story 9. The church stood alone at the edge of town, its wooden frame worn by years of neglect. The stained glass windows were cracked, some missing entirely, leaving jagged edges behind. Ivy crept up the stone walls, winding through gaps like nature reclaiming what had been abandoned. I stepped inside, the heavy doors groaning as they moved. The scent of dust and damp wood filled the air, mingling with the faintest trace of something else, something stale, almost metallic. Pews lined the nave in uneven rows, their surfaces covered in a thick layer of dust. A strange silence hung in the air, pressing against my ears like a weight. My footsteps echoed softly, the sound swallowed by the vast emptiness. I moved forward, my eyes adjusting to the dim light filtering through the ruined windows. That was when I saw them, the newspapers stacked neatly on the pews. They were yellowed with age, edges curled from exposure. At first they seemed ordinary, but as I stepped closer, the headline sent a chill down my spine. Each one reported a disappearance, the dates spanning decades. Names of people I didn't recognize filled the pages, each one marked as missing. I reached for the top newspaper, brushing off a thin layer of dust. My stomach twisted as I read the most recent headline, the ink slightly smudged but unmistakable. It bore my name. My full name printed in bold letters, followed by the words vanished without a trace. I staggered back, my breath hitching in my throat. The date on the paper was today. My hands trembled as I flipped through the article, scanning for an explanation, but there was nothing more than vague details. No cause, no known whereabouts, just a brief statement that I had disappeared. A sharp gust of wind rushed through the church, rattling the loose panes of glass. The candles near the altar flickered, though I hadn't noticed them lit before. The air grew colder, and a prickling sensation crawled up my spine. I turned in a slow circle, scanning the empty church. There was no one else here, no sign of movement, yet I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. The shadows in the corners seemed darker now, stretching just a little too far. The wind stirred the newspapers, flipping pages as if unseen hands were rifling through them. My own name appeared again and again, as though it had always been there. I backed away, my pulse hammering in my ears, but my feet felt heavy, as if the floor itself resisted my movement. The doors at the far end of the church slammed shut with a force that shook the walls. The sound echoed, bouncing through the empty space, before settling into an unnatural stillness. I forced myself to move, my legs sluggish as if wading through water. A faint whisper rose from the darkness near the altar. It was too quiet to make out words, but the tone was unmistakable, a hushed urgency, a warning, or perhaps a plea. I strained to listen, my breath coming in shallow gasps. The whispering grew louder, overlapping voices weaving together in an eerie chorus. It was coming from the walls, the ceiling, the very air itself. I turned sharply, searching for the source, but the church remained empty. Then, the pews shifted. The wood groaned as if bearing an unseen weight. I stepped back, my foot striking something solid. I looked down and felt my blood run cold. A fresh newspaper had appeared at my feet, crisp and unstained. The headline was the same, but beneath it, new words had been added in red ink. You were warned. The ink was still wet, smudging beneath my fingertips. My breath came in ragged gasps as I backed away, my body screaming at me to leave. The whispering grew frantic now, the voices overlapping in a desperate, panicked rush. The candles on the altar flared, casting wild shadows across the walls. The air crackled with something unseen, something wrong. I turned and ran, my footsteps slamming against the wooden floor. The newspapers scattered as I moved, their pages twisting in the air. I reached the doors and pushed, but they didn't budge. The wood was solid, unmoving, as though it had fused with the walls. Behind me, the whispering stopped. The silence that followed was worse. It was a void, thick and suffocating, pressing against my ears until I could hear nothing but the sound of my own breathing. Then a creak, slow, deliberate. Footsteps on the floor behind me. I didn't turn. I couldn't. My hands still pressed against the doors, fingers numb, as the unseen presence moved closer. A voice, low and familiar, spoke just behind my ear. You shouldn't have come. It wasn't a whisper anymore. It was real, solid, too close. The doors suddenly gave way, and I stumbled forward into the night. The cold air hit my face, sharp and biting, as I fell onto the stone steps. I scrambled up, my body trembling, and turned to look back. The church stood silent, unchanged, its windows dark once more. The doors were open, swinging slightly in the wind, but the newspapers were gone, as if they had never been there. The pews sat undisturbed, coated in dust. I backed away, my breath coming in short bursts. My name had been printed in that newspaper, the date marking my disappearance. But I was still here, wasn't I? I reached into my pocket, my fingers brushing against something crumpled. Slowly, I pulled it out, a single newspaper clipping. My name, my face, the same words printed in bold. Vanished without a trace. Story 10. The mansion stood at the end of a forgotten road, its once grand exterior now draped in ivy and decay. The windows were dark, their glass smudged with dust, reflecting nothing but the overcast sky. I had heard rumors about this place, stories of strange happenings and whispers in the night. But curiosity had always been my weakness, and today it led me through the rusted gate and up the cracked stone steps. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of old wood and damp fabric. The grand staircase loomed ahead, its steps warped from years of neglect. Faded wallpaper peeled from the walls, revealing layers of time beneath. Every sound seemed amplified in the stillness, the creak of the floorboards, the distant rustling of something unseen. I moved carefully, running my fingers along the dust-covered furniture as I explored. The house was filled with relics of another time, ornate mirrors, heavy drapes, and portraits of people whose eyes seemed to follow me. There was an unsettling feeling that I wasn't alone, but I pushed the thought aside and continued my search. The basement door was hidden behind a tattered curtain at the end of the hallway. It was slightly ajar, as if inviting me to descend into the darkness below. The steps groaned under my weight as I made my way down, the air growing colder with each step. A single light bulb flickered overhead, casting weak shadows across the stone walls. The basement was filled with forgotten things, wooden crates, broken furniture, and stacks of yellowed newspapers. I moved deeper, running my flashlight over the walls until I saw a door, different from the rest. It was locked, its iron handle cool beneath my fingers, as if untouched for years. Something about it felt wrong, but my curiosity won over hesitation. I searched the basement until I found an old ring of keys, their metal rusted and brittle. My hands trembled as I tried them one by one, my breath shallow with antichill. Finally, one turned with a heavy click, and the door creaked open, revealing a room hidden from time. Inside, the air was stale, carrying the scent of old paper and something faintly metallic. A single table sat in the center, covered in photographs scattered across its surface. The walls were lined with shelves, each holding boxes marked with names I didn't recognize. Dust motes swirled in the dim light as I stepped forward. I picked up a photograph, my fingers leaving prints in the thick layer of dust. It was black and white, the faces staring back at me solemn and still. I flipped through more, feeling a growing unease as I realized none of the people looked familiar. They were strangers frozen in time, their expressions distant and haunting. Then my breath caught in my throat. Among the old photographs, there was one that made my blood run cold. It was my face staring back at me from the past, unchanged. The same eyes, the same features, every detail was identical, as if the photo had been taken only yesterday. My heart pounded as I searched for an explanation. The edges of the photograph were worn, its corners curling with age. There was no date, no writing on the back, just the eerie, undeniable truth staring back at me. I swallowed hard, my hands trembling as I backed away from the table. A sudden noise made me freeze. The soft sound of something shifting in the shadows beyond the doorway sent a chill down my spine. I turned sharply, my flashlight beam slicing through the darkness. The basement had been silent when I entered, but now I wasn't so sure I was alone. The air felt heavier, charged with something unseen. My skin prickled as I stepped backward, my pulse hammering in my ears. The basement door was still open at the top of the stairs, but it felt impossibly far away. I forced myself to move, shoving the photograph into my pocket as I turned toward the exit. As I reached the stairs, a cold gust of air brushed against my neck, making me stop. It wasn't a natural draft, there was something deliberate about it, like breath against my skin. I clenched my jaw, refusing to turn around, every instinct screaming for me to run. I took the steps two at a time, my hands gripping the railing as I pushed myself forward. The door to the basement slammed shut behind me, shaking the walls with a force that made my chest tighten. I didn't look back, I couldn't. I just kept moving, my footsteps unsteady as I made my way toward the front door. The house felt different now, as if the walls had shifted in my absence. The portraits lining the hallway seemed darker, their faces more obscured by shadows. I reached the door and yanked it open, stepping out into the cold air with a shuddering breath. I didn't stop until I was back in my car, my hands gripping the wheel tightly. The photograph was still in my pocket, its presence heavy against my leg. I pulled it out once more, half hoping I had imagined it. But there was my face, frozen in time, in a place where I had never been. I left the mansion behind, watching in the rearview mirror as it disappeared into the trees. The unease didn't fade, nor did the sense that I had disturbed something meant to remain hidden. The photograph remained in my possession, a silent reminder of what I had found. That night, sleep didn't come easily. My mind replayed every moment in the basement, every shadow that had moved just beyond my sight. I told myself it was just an old photograph, a strange coincidence. But deep down I knew the truth. Somewhere in that mansion, long before I was ever born, someone had taken that picture. Someone had known I would come, and now they knew I had found it. Story 11. The old theater stood in the heart of a forgotten street, its grand marquee covered in dust and grime. The letters had long since fallen away, leaving behind empty sockets where show titles once gleamed. Vines curled around the crumbling facade, creeping through cracks like nature's attempt to reclaim what time had abandoned. I had passed by this place many times, but tonight something drew me in. The heavy doors groaned as I pushed them open, revealing a grand but decayed lobby. The chandeliers above were coated in thick dust, their crystals dull and lifeless. Torn velvet ropes still sectioned off ticket lines, swaying slightly as if disturbed by an unseen presence. The scent of old fabric and rotting wood filled the air, mingling with something faintly metallic. I stepped forward, my eyes drawn to the ticket booth standing untouched in the center of the lobby. Unlike the rest of the theater, it appeared almost pristine. The glass was unbroken, the wooden frame still polished beneath a thin layer of dust. The cash register sat open, revealing empty compartments where money once passed through eager hands. Curiosity pulled me closer as I peered inside. A single ticket lay on the counter, its edges crisp and unmarred by time. My stomach tightened as I read the name printed in bold letters, my own. Below it, the date was stamped clearly, tonight. My pulse quickened, my breath coming in short, measured exhales. I picked up the ticket, feeling its weight in my hand. The ink was fresh, as though it had just been printed. The silence around me grew heavier, pressing against my ears. There was no logical explanation for this. The theater had been closed for decades. No one should have known I would be here. A faint rustling came from deeper inside the building, the sound of movement in the empty space. My eyes darted toward the grand staircase leading up to the balcony seats. Shadows flickered against the walls, shifting in the dim light. My fingers tightened around the ticket as unease settled deep in my bones. I turned toward the auditorium doors, unable to ignore the pull any longer. The heavy wood gave way beneath my touch, swinging open with a long, slow creak. Inside, rows of red velvet seats stretched toward the stage, their plush fabric torn and faded. The vast ceiling above was painted with intricate murals, now obscured by layers of dust and peeling paint. The stage loomed ahead, its curtains hanging in tatters. An old piano sat off to the side, its keys exposed like broken teeth. Despite the decay, the theater held an eerie sense of expectancy, as if waiting for something or someone to arrive. The air felt charged, thick with unseen energy. I stepped forward, my footfalls muted by the thick carpet. As I neared the stage, the lights overhead flickered, buzzing weakly before steadying into a dim glow. My breath hitched. The theater had no power. The city had cut it off years ago. Yet the bulbs above burned faintly, casting long, wavering shadows. A sound echoed through the space, the unmistakable shuffle of footsteps. I turned sharply, scanning the rows of seats, but they remained empty. The silence returned, thick and suffocating. My heartbeat pounded in my ears, my grip tightening around the ticket. A sudden movement on the stage caught my eye. The curtains shifted slightly, as if something had brushed against them. My breath came shallow as I stepped closer. The wooden steps creaked beneath my weight as I ascended, each movement slow and deliberate. The stage smelled of dust and aged wood, but beneath it was something else, something faintly sweet, almost sickly. The piano keys let out a soft, discordant note. I froze, my blood turning to ice. My hands trembled as I turned my gaze toward the instrument. The lid was open, the hammers exposed, but there was no one there. The note still rang in the air, fading slowly into the silence. I swallowed hard, my mouth dry. A faint whisper drifted from the wings of the stage, a voice too soft to make out. The curtains rustled again, this time with more force. My legs locked in place, every instinct screaming at me to leave. Yet something deeper, something unexplainable held me there. The ticket in my hand grew warm, the paper almost pulsing against my skin. My name, printed so clearly, seemed to darken as if the ink was shifting. The edges curled slightly, the letters stretching, distorting. My breath hitched as the date beneath it flickered. Tonight had changed to now. A gust of cold air rushed through the auditorium, sending a shiver down my spine. The chandeliers overhead rattled, their crystals clinking like distant chimes. The air thickened, pressing down on my shoulders, making it harder to breathe. A presence filled the space, unseen but undeniable. A voice, low and echoing, spoke from the darkness behind the curtain. "You're late." The words sent a jolt of terror through my body. The warmth from the ticket turned into searing heat, forcing me to drop it. It fluttered to the floor, landing with a sound too loud for mere paper. The theater groaned around me, the wooden floor beneath my feet seeming to shift. The seats stretched further into the distance, their rows multiplying. The walls pulsed, the murals above shifting as if the figures within them were watching. I stumbled backward, my body screaming for escape. The doors to the auditorium slammed shut with a deafening boom. The lights flickered again, their glow growing dimmer. My reflection in the stage's polished floor wavered, shifting into something unfamiliar. The shadows in the seats deepened, filling the spaces where the audience should have been. A new ticket appeared on the floor beside the one I had dropped, identical in every way except for one small change. The date now read forever. My chest tightened, my vision blurring at the edges. The whispering grew louder, surrounding me, voices overlapping in a language I didn't understand. The curtains parted slowly, revealing nothing but endless darkness beyond. A chill seeped into my bones, freezing me in place. The shadows from the seats began to rise, moving toward me, silent and inevitable. The stage beneath me softened, pulling me downward, as if the theater itself had decided I was part of the performance. I gasped, struggling against the unseen force, but it was useless. The walls of the theater stretched taller, the ceiling fading into an endless void. My reflection in the polished stage stared back at me with wide, terrified eyes before vanishing altogether. The last thing I saw was the rows of seats filled at last, their occupants faceless, waiting for the show to begin. Story 12. The abandoned school stood at the edge of town, its windows shattered and walls covered in graffiti. The roof sagged in places and weeds had begun reclaiming the pavement. I had always been drawn to forgotten places, eager to explore their history, to uncover what had been left behind. This school, however, had a strange reputation, stories of students disappearing, of eerie noises echoing through the halls long after it had been shut down. Pushing open the rusted front doors, I stepped inside, my footsteps echoing in the vast emptiness. The air was thick with dust, the scent of mildew clinging to every surface. Rows of lockers lined the hallway, their doors either hanging open or rusted shut. Desks and chairs were scattered across classrooms, as if the students had fled in the middle of a lesson. A strange silence filled the air, heavy and expectant. I moved carefully through the corridors, my flashlight cutting through the dimness. Faint scrawls covered the chalkboards, half-erased lessons, doodles from a past long forgotten. As I walked, I noticed a single locker standing out among the others. Unlike the rest, its door was shut, the paint less corroded, the handle free of rust. Something about it felt deliberate, as if it had been waiting to be opened. Curiosity pushed me forward, my fingers curling around the cool metal handle. With a hesitant pull, the door creaked open, revealing a neat stack of papers resting inside. At first, I assumed they were old assignments or forgotten notes, but as I picked up the top sheet, my breath caught in my throat. It was a drawing of me. The details were precise, almost impossibly so. My clothes, my stance, even the way my hair fell over my shoulders, it was all captured perfectly. My fingers trembled as I flipped to the next page. Another drawing, the same level of detail, but now I was reaching toward the locker, just as I had moments ago. A chill crept down my spine as I flipped through the rest. Each page depicted me exactly as I was in that moment, as if someone had been watching me. One showed me holding the flashlight in my left hand, another captured the slight furrow in my brow. I swallowed hard, my throat dry, my heart hammering against my ribs. Someone had drawn these before I had even arrived. I turned, scanning the hallway, the feeling of being watched now unbearable. The air felt heavier, the silence more oppressive. My hands clenched around the papers as I took a slow step back. The logical part of my mind scrambled for an explanation. Maybe someone had been here recently. Maybe it was a trick, a coincidence. But deep down, I knew better. The final drawing at the bottom of the stack made my stomach drop. Unlike the others, it wasn't a moment from the past, but something yet to happen. It showed me standing in the very same hallway, looking over my shoulder, and behind me, in the shadows, was a figure. A sharp creak echoed from down the hall. My breath caught as I turned, my flashlight beam shaking in my grip. The hallway was empty, but the sound had been real, too real to be my imagination. I forced myself to take slow steps forward, my pulse thudding in my ears. The school had been abandoned for years, but in that moment I wasn't alone. Each door I passed stood open, revealing empty classrooms filled with overturned desks and peeling posters. The atmosphere grew heavier the further I went, the air thick with something I couldn't name. Then, another noise closer this time, the soft sound of paper shifting. I turned a corner, and my flashlight flickered. At the end of the hall, a figure stood partially obscured by shadows. My breath caught in my throat as I raised the light, but the beam faltered again, distorting the silhouette. It was tall, motionless, watching. The figure didn't move, but the weight of its gaze pressed against me. My grip tightened around the papers as I forced my feet to move. I stepped backward, my body screaming at me to run, but fear held me in place. The air between us seemed to ripple, a silent tension stretching the space too thin. Then, in a blink, the figure was gone. The hallway was empty, the air suddenly colder. My flashlight steadied, the light no longer flickering, but the silence had changed, deeper now, more expectant. I turned and ran, my footsteps loud against the tile, my breaths ragged. The school seemed larger than before, the exit impossibly far away. Reaching the front doors, I shoved them open and stumbled into the night air. My chest heaved as I looked back, expecting to see someone standing in the doorway. But the school remained still, as if nothing had happened. The drawings trembled in my grip, proof that it hadn't been my imagination. I didn't stop running until I reached my car, locking the doors as soon as I got inside. The papers sat on the passenger seat, mocking me with their impossible detail. My hand shook as I grabbed the final drawing once more, my stomach twisting. In the corner of the page, in small, precise handwriting, were 4 words. I am still watching. Story 13. The military base had been abandoned for decades, its existence buried beneath layers of time and secrecy. Hidden deep in the woods, it was little more than crumbling concrete structures and rusted fences swallowed by creeping vines. I had always been drawn to places like this, places forgotten by the world yet still carrying whispers of their past. The journey to get here had been rough, the forest thick and unwelcoming, but standing before the looming entrance of a bunker, I felt the familiar pull of curiosity. The bunker's steel door hung slightly open, its hinges corroded with rust. I hesitated, listening to the silence that pressed in from all sides. The air smelled of damp earth and decay, a stark contrast to the crisp autumn wind outside. Taking a deep breath, I stepped inside, my flashlight beam cutting through the darkness. The walls were lined with peeling paint, remnants of old maps and faded warnings barely visible beneath layers of dust. I moved cautiously, my footsteps echoing in the empty space. Broken chairs and overturned tables littered the floor, scattered as if whoever had been here last had left in a hurry. Filing cabinets stood with their drawers yanked open, their contents long gone or destroyed by time. The deeper I went, the colder it felt, the weight of the place pressing against my skin. A long hallway stretched ahead, leading to a heavy metal door that had been forced ajar. Beyond it, a room lay in disarray. Old radios, broken headsets, and shattered monitors covered every surface. I stepped inside, drawn to a dusty radio sitting on a rusted metal desk. Its dials were worn, its speaker coated in grime, yet something about it made me reach out. I wiped away the dust, revealing faded military markings. My fingers hesitated over the knob before twisting it slightly, expecting nothing but silence. At first there was only static, a low hum that buzzed through the room like an unseen presence. Then a voice crackled through, distant and broken. "We know you're here." I froze, my pulse hammering against my ribs. The voice was distorted, its origin impossible to determine. My flashlight flickered, casting erratic shadows across the walls. I swallowed hard, glancing around as if expecting someone to step out of the darkness. But the room remained empty, save for the forgotten remnants of a past long gone. My breath felt too loud as I leaned closer, hand hovering over the dial. Maybe it was interference, a stray signal bouncing through time. Maybe it was nothing. But then the voice came again, clearer this time, as if whoever was speaking had drawn closer. "You shouldn't have come." A sharp chill ran down my spine. The radio whined with static, its garbled noise rising in pitch. I turned it off quickly, my hands trembling. The silence that followed was suffocating, as if the whole bunker had stilled, waiting. I backed away, my mind racing. There was no power here, no reason for the radio to work. A faint sound echoed from the hallway, something shuffling against the concrete floor. I held my breath, straining to listen. The noise stopped, replaced by an unsettling stillness. I wasn't alone. I turned, my flashlight beam slicing through the darkened corridor, but nothing was there. Just empty space, cold air, and the steady drip of water from the ceiling. I needed to leave. My instincts screamed at me to get out before something I couldn't explain found me. Moving quickly, I stepped into the hallway, my ears tuned to the silence, waiting for any sign of movement. The bunker seemed to stretch longer than before, the shadows thicker, the air heavier. Then, from behind me, the radio crackled to life again. "You're not alone." I broke into a run, my heart slamming against my ribs. The entrance was just ahead, the faint glow of daylight spilling in from outside. My breath came fast and uneven as I burst through the doorway, stumbling into the open air. The forest had never felt safer, the wind biting against my skin like a welcome reminder that I was out. I didn't stop running until I was deep into the woods, the bunker hidden behind a thick wall of trees. Only then did I pause, hands on my knees, struggling to catch my breath. My mind reeled, trying to rationalize what had happened. The radio. The voice. The presence I had felt lingering in that space. Had I disturbed something? Had I woken something that should have remained forgotten? As I turned back toward the path that would lead me home, I heard it one last time. A voice, faint and distant, carried by the wind. "We'll be seeing you." I didn't look back. Story 14. The factory had been abandoned for years, its rusted exterior a stark reminder of a place that had once thrived. I had always been drawn to places like this, forgotten by time and left to decay. That night, curiosity got the best of me, and I found myself standing before the massive building, the cold air biting at my skin. The fence surrounding it was partially collapsed, making it easy to slip inside without much effort. The inside was a maze of metal and shadows, the air thick with dust and the scent of oil that had long since turned rancid. My footsteps echoed as I moved between the rows of silent machines, their forms looming like sleeping giants. Rust covered every surface, and broken glass crunched beneath my boots. It was eerily quiet, the kind of silence that felt unnatural, as if the building itself was holding its breath. As I wandered deeper into the factory, a distant sound made me freeze. It was faint at first, but unmistakable, the low, rhythmic hum of machinery in motion. My pulse quickened as I followed the noise, my flashlight trembling slightly in my grip. Every step brought me closer to something that shouldn't have been possible. The factory had no power. There was no reason for anything to be running. Turning a corner, I finally saw it. A large industrial machine, one of the few still intact, was operating as if it had never stopped. The gears turned with an almost hypnotic precision, the conveyor belt rolling forward in steady intervals. My breath hitched as I realized what I was seeing. This place had been abandoned for years, yet the machine looked as though it had just been serviced. My eyes drifted to the operator's seat, positioned right beside the control panel. It was empty. The hairs on my arms stood on end as an inexplicable sense of unease washed over me. Someone had turned this on. Someone had been here, yet the factory was supposed to be deserted. I swallowed hard, trying to rationalize what I was seeing. Maybe someone had rigged it to start on a timer. Maybe it was a trick of faulty wiring. Then I felt it. A presence behind me, heavy and unmistakable. My breath caught in my throat as the sensation intensified, every nerve in my body screaming at me to run. I couldn't move. It wasn't just the feeling of being watched, it was as if something was standing so close I should have felt breath on my neck. My fingers tightened around the flashlight, my mind racing for an explanation. Summoning what little courage I had, I turned around in one swift motion, my flashlight slicing through the darkness. The beam of light landed on nothing but empty space. My chest rose and fell in sharp, uneven breaths as I scanned the area, my heart hammering against my ribs. There was no one there, but the feeling hadn't gone away. It lingered, pressing down on me like an unseen weight. A sudden metallic clang shattered the silence, making me jump. My flashlight swung toward the source of the noise. A tool had fallen from a nearby workbench, rolling across the floor before coming to a stop. My stomach twisted into knots as I took a shaky step back, my instincts screaming that I was no longer alone. I wanted to believe it had just been gravity, but deep down I knew better. The hum of the machine grew louder, almost deafening, as if responding to my fear. I turned back to it, my mind racing with questions. Who had turned it on? And more importantly, where were they now? I took a cautious step forward, hesitantly reaching for the control panel. My fingers hovered over the buttons, debating whether to shut it off. Then, out of the corner of my eye, something moved. It was quick, a shadow slipping between the machinery, just beyond the reach of my flashlight. My blood ran cold. I wasn't imagining this. Someone or something was here with me. I spun toward the direction of the movement, but all I found was more darkness. The silence stretched, thick and suffocating. I needed to get out. Whatever was happening here, I wanted no part of it. Keeping my flashlight raised, I started backing away from the machine, my every step careful and deliberate. The feeling of being watched grew stronger, like invisible eyes tracking my every move. My breathing was shallow, my body rigid with fear. Then the machine stopped. Just like that, the grinding of gears and steady hum of the motor ceased, leaving only an eerie, suffocating stillness in its wake. The abrupt silence made my skin crawl. I didn't touch anything. I didn't shut it off. Something else had. A whisper cut through the air, low and breathy, just behind me. I couldn't make out the words, but the sound alone sent a bolt of terror through me. I spun around so fast I nearly lost my footing, my flashlight shaking wildly as I searched for the source. The factory remained empty, yet I knew I wasn't alone. The air around me grew colder, my breath visible in thin wisps. My hands trembled as I clutched the flashlight tighter, my pulse roaring in my ears. Then, another sound, a dragging noise, slow and deliberate, coming from somewhere deeper in the factory. It was moving toward me. Panic surged through me, and I did the only thing I could. I ran. My boots pounded against the concrete as I darted between the machines, my flashlight bouncing with each frantic step. The exit loomed ahead, and I pushed myself faster, my legs burning with the effort. Just as I reached the doorway, a loud bang echoed behind me, like something massive crashing onto the floor. I didn't dare look back. I threw myself outside, gasping for air as I stumbled into the open lot. The cold night air hit me like a slap, but I didn't stop. I kept running until the factory was nothing more than a dark silhouette in the distance. When I finally slowed, my entire body trembling, I turned back toward the building. The windows were dark, the entrance still gaping open. It looked just as abandoned as before, as if nothing had happened. But I knew better. Something was inside that factory. Something had been standing behind me. And as I watched, the faintest glow flickered from within, the machine humming back to life. Story 15. The shopping mall had been abandoned for years, its empty corridors stretching into darkness. Most of the stores were hollow shells, their windows shattered, their displays stripped bare. The air was thick with dust, carrying the faint scent of mildew and decay. My footsteps echoed as I moved through the main hall, my flashlight casting long, shifting shadows. The silence was absolute, save for the occasional drip of water from a broken ceiling panel. I had expected nothing but ruins, but then I saw it, a single store, untouched, its glass front perfectly intact. The sign above the entrance was missing, leaving only rusted bolts where letters had once been. Inside, rows of clothing racks stood neatly arranged, each one stocked with identical garments. The eerie part. Every single outfit was labeled extra small, as if the store had catered to only one type of customer. I stepped inside, the floor strangely clean beneath my feet. The air felt different here, stale yet charged, as if the space had been sealed off from time. My fingers brushed against the fabric of a dress, the material smooth and new, completely out of place in a mall long abandoned. As I moved deeper into the store, a mannequin near the back caught my eye. It stood alone, positioned in front of a cracked mirror, its pale plastic hands frozen in an unnatural pose. My breath hitched as I took in its face, the features eerily familiar, too familiar. The mannequin looked exactly like me. Same jawline, same nose, even the same stray hairs falling across its forehead. Its blank eyes stared straight ahead, lifeless yet unnervingly aware, as if it had been waiting for me to arrive. A shiver ran down my spine as I stepped closer, my reflection flickering in the fractured glass behind it. The mannequin was dressed in a simple black outfit, one I didn't recognize until I looked down and realized I was wearing the exact same thing. I stumbled back, my pulse pounding as a cold weight settled in my chest. The store, the clothes, the mannequin, none of it made sense. My flashlight flickered, casting brief shadows that made it seem as if the mannequin had shifted, just slightly, just enough to notice. A faint rustling sound came from the back of the store, like fabric shifting against fabric. I turned sharply, my light sweeping across the racks, but nothing moved. The air felt thicker now, pressing in, the silence too deliberate, too expectant. I had to get out. The mannequin, the clothes, the unnatural preservation of the store, it was all wrong. I turned for the exit, but as I did, I caught something out of the corner of my eye. The mannequin's hand had moved. It was subtle, barely noticeable, but the fingers were curled ever so slightly, as if beckoning. I bolted. My feet pounded against the floor as I rushed out, my breath coming fast and shallow. The moment I crossed the threshold, a sharp sound rang out behind me, a heavy crash, like something falling. I didn't look back. I sprinted down the mall's corridor, my flashlight bouncing with each step. The oppressive silence had lifted, replaced by a soft whispering that slithered through the air. I couldn't make out the words, but they came from behind me, growing louder, closer. When I reached the entrance, I slammed against the rusted security gate, forcing my way through the gap I had entered from. The air outside was frigid, but I welcomed the sting against my skin. Only when I was safely away from the mall did I dare turn back. Through the broken glass, the store was still visible, its lights now dim. The mannequin stood exactly where it had before, motionless, unchanged. But something was different. The reflection in the cracked mirror was gone. Story 16. The mansion loomed ahead, its darkened windows like empty eyes staring out at the overgrown landscape. Vines crept up the crumbling stone walls, their tendrils wrapping around the rusted balcony railings. The once grand front doors were slightly ajar, swaying with each passing gust of wind. I had heard the stories about this place, but curiosity had always outweighed caution. Stepping inside, I was greeted by the musty scent of decay and aged wood. Dust coated every surface, and the remnants of a luxurious past lay scattered across the floor. A grand chandelier hung from the ceiling, its crystals dulled with grime, barely catching the light filtering through the broken windows. My footsteps echoed through the empty hall as I moved deeper inside, my breath coming slow and steady. A long corridor stretched ahead, lined with doors leading to rooms frozen in time. A faded wallpaper peeled from the walls, revealing the wooden panels beneath. A few of the doors were slightly open, hinting at what lay beyond: forgotten bedrooms, empty parlors, and remnants of a life once lived. The air was thick with an eerie stillness, as if the house itself was holding its breath. I turned a corner and found a study, the furniture draped in white sheets. An old desk stood near a dusty bookshelf, its drawers half open, revealing stacks of yellowed papers. My eyes landed on a wooden cabinet, its glass doors clouded with age. Inside, I could make out rows of framed photographs, neatly arranged despite the disarray around them. Curiosity drew me forward, and I wiped the dust from the glass, revealing the images more clearly. The photographs were of a family, a man, a woman, and 2 children, all dressed in elegant clothing from a bygone era. Their faces held expressions of quiet contentment, as if they had been frozen in time at their happiest moments. I studied them closely, wondering what had happened to them, why they had abandoned the home that now stood in ruin. As I examined the photographs, I noticed something unsettling. Each frame seemed to depict a different part of the mansion, capturing moments within its walls. One showed the grand staircase, another the library, and yet another the very hallway I had just walked through. My pulse quickened as I realized the sequence of images appeared to follow a path, one that mirrored my own. I reached the last photograph and felt my breath catch in my throat. It was different from the rest, newer, clearer. The image was of the front door, the very entrance I had stepped through just minutes ago, and standing in the doorway was me. I staggered back, my heart hammering against my ribs. The photograph had captured me before I had even entered the house, as if it had been waiting for me. My mind raced for an explanation, but none came. The dust in the room remained undisturbed, the glass on the cabinet smudged only where I had wiped it clean. There was no sign that anyone had been here to take such a photo. A cold prickle ran down my spine, and I turned sharply, scanning the room for any sign of movement. The house was silent, but it no longer felt empty. It felt like something was watching, waiting. I swallowed hard, my hands trembling as I backed away from the cabinet, my eyes flicking toward the door. Then, somewhere in the distance, a creaking sound echoed through the mansion. It was slow, deliberate, like a footstep pressing against old wooden floors. I held my breath, straining to listen, trying to pinpoint where it had come from. Another creak followed, closer this time, coming from the hallway just beyond the study. I forced myself to move, stepping out into the corridor with slow, cautious movements. The air felt heavier now, the shadows stretching unnaturally across the walls. The staircase loomed ahead, its steps covered in a thick layer of dust. But something was wrong. The dust had been disturbed, a trail of faint footprints leading up toward the second floor. I hesitated, my instincts screaming for me to leave, but something about the footprints made my stomach turn. They were mine. I glanced back, my own tracks visible in the dust behind me, leading from the entrance to the study. But these prints ahead, they were identical, down to the pattern of my shoes. A sharp chill ran through me, and I clenched my fists, forcing myself to stay calm. My only way out was through the front door, and I had no intention of lingering any longer. I turned toward the exit, but the moment I moved, a soft whisper carried through the air. It wasn't clear, more of a breath against my ear, like someone speaking just beyond the range of understanding. I didn't look back. My pace quickened as I walked toward the entrance, the air pressing in around me. The moment I reached the threshold, the house seemed to exhale, the tension in the air shifting, almost as if it was releasing me. I stepped outside, my breath ragged, my skin damp with cold sweat. The air outside was different, lighter, clearer, untouched by whatever presence lingered inside. The mansion stood behind me, its darkened windows unchanging, its silence unbroken. I turned one last time, glancing toward the front door, half expecting to see something standing there. But there was nothing. I started walking away, my mind racing through what I had just experienced. The photograph, the footsteps, the whispers, none of it made sense. And yet, as I reached the overgrown path leading back to the road, I couldn't shake the feeling that I hadn't left the house entirely behind. A nagging thought crept into my mind, one that refused to be ignored. The last photograph had shown me standing at the entrance before I entered. But what if there was another photo now, one taken just after I had left? One where I was no longer alone. Story 17. The abandoned prison stood on the outskirts of town, its decayed walls barely visible beneath layers of creeping ivy. The rusted front gate was locked with a heavy chain, but a section of the fence had collapsed, leaving a narrow gap just wide enough for me to slip through. The air was thick with the scent of damp stone and rust, and the eerie silence pressed down on me like a weight. I had always been drawn to places like this, forgotten, untouched by time, hiding secrets within their walls. Stepping inside, I found the interior, just as I had imagined: peeling paint, broken light fixtures, and graffiti scrawled across the walls. The cell doors stood open, their iron bars coated in layers of dust and corrosion. Some cells still held remnants of past lives: a torn mattress, an old shoe, a rusted metal cup. Each object told a story, a fragment of someone's existence that had long since faded into history. As I made my way through the corridors, my footsteps echoed unnaturally, bouncing off the cold concrete walls. The deeper I went, the heavier the air became, as if the prison itself didn't want me there. Faded notices still clung to the bulletin boards, their edges curled and yellowed with age. One in particular caught my eye: a list of prisoners, their names typed neatly in columns. Dust coated the surface, but I could still make out the names beneath it. Some were crossed out, others had faded beyond recognition, but one stood out immediately: my own. My breath hitched as my eyes scanned the line again, my fingers trembling as I wiped away the dust. Next to my name, a single word had been written in red ink, its edges smeared as if someone had traced over it more than once. Missing. A chill ran through me, my pulse hammering in my ears. It had to be a coincidence, a mistake, a name shared by someone else. But the sick feeling in my gut told me otherwise. I traced the letters again, my skin prickling as a sudden draft whispered through Friedor. I wasn't supposed to be here. A distant noise made me stiffen, a soft creak, like weight shifting on an old floorboard. I turned sharply, scanning the hallway, but nothing moved. The cells stood empty, the air still, but the silence had changed. It felt charged now, expectant, as if something unseen had noticed me. Forcing myself to breathe, I stepped back, my eyes flicking over the rest of the board. The list contained dozens of names, but none of them meant anything to me. My name was the only one marked as missing, the only one that felt deliberately placed. I needed to leave, but my feet wouldn't move. A sudden gust of wind pushed past me, rattling a door further down the hall. The sound jolted me into action, and I turned, moving quickly toward the exit. Each step felt heavier, like the air itself was resisting me, like the prison had no intention of letting me go. My heart pounded as I neared the main hallway, my fingers curling into fists. The hallway seemed longer than before, stretching endlessly ahead of me. The cells blurred together, their open doors gaping like mouths in the dim light. My own breathing sounded too loud, each inhale sharp and unsteady. Then, just as I reached the end of the corridor, I saw another notice, pinned to the wall. It was newer than the others, the paper crisp, untouched by time. My fingers hesitated before reaching for it, but I couldn't stop myself from reading. Inmate status missing. Last seen inside facility. The words sent ice through my veins. This wasn't old. Someone had put this here recently. Someone knew I was here. A scraping sound echoed behind me, slow and deliberate, like something heavy dragging across the floor. I turned instinctively, but the hallway was empty. The cells remained dark and motionless, yet the feeling of being watched intensified. My skin crawled as I backed away, my heartbeat hammering in my ears. Then, from the far end of the hall, a single cell door creaked open. The sound was painfully slow, metal groaning against metal, the hinges shrieking in protest. My throat tightened as I took another step back, my body screaming at me to run. I couldn't see anything beyond the bars, only the yawning darkness within. The air grew colder, a suffocating stillness pressing down on my chest. My own name echoed in my head over and over, that single word missing searing itself into my mind. My hands trembled as I turned toward the exit, my legs finally obeying. I needed to get out. Now. I ran, my footsteps slamming against the floor, the hallways twisting and turning around me. The prison felt different now. The walls tighter, the doors shifting, as if the entire structure had come alive. The exit was just ahead, but the space between me and freedom stretched impossibly long. A shadow flickered in the corner of my vision, just at the edge of the dim light. My breath caught, but I didn't slow down. Whatever was in here, whatever had written my name on that list, wasn't going to let me leave easily. The door was closer now, my pulse roaring in my ears. The second I reached it, I shoved it open, stumbling into the cold night air. My lungs burned as I gasped for breath, my hands shaking violently. The prison loomed behind me, silent once more, its windows dark and empty. But I knew deep down that it wasn't empty, and it had been waiting for me. I turned and ran toward my car, my keys slipping in my grasp as I unlocked the door. My hands were slick with sweat, my entire body trembling as I slid into the driver's seat. The engine roared to life, but I hesitated for just a moment, my eyes flicking toward the prison one last time. A single figure stood at the entrance, barely visible in the darkness. It wasn't moving, just watching. My stomach clenched, my fingers tightening around the steering wheel. I blinked, and it was gone. The door stood open now, swinging slightly in the night breeze, inviting me back inside. I slammed my foot on the gas, the tires kicking up dust as I sped away. The road twisted through the trees, the prison shrinking in my rearview mirror, but the weight in my chest didn't lift. The word missing still echoed in my mind, burned into my thoughts. I had made it out, but deep down, I knew something had followed, and it wouldn't stop until I truly belonged to the prison. Story 18. The amusement park had been abandoned for decades, its skeletal remains hidden beneath layers of ivy and decay. Rides stood frozen in time, their metal frames rusting beneath years of rain and neglect. The entrance arch had collapsed, and the ticket booths were barely recognizable beneath the creeping vines. The air was thick with the scent of rotting wood and damp earth, a silent graveyard of laughter and childhood memories. I wandered through the deserted park, my footsteps crunching over broken glass and scattered debris. The wind whistled through the empty stalls, rattling the remnants of a game booth where stuffed animals had long since disintegrated. The roller coaster loomed in the distance, its once towering tracks twisted and broken. Yet, amid the ruin, one structure stood untouched, pristine in its defiance of time. The carousel sat at the heart of the park, its bright colors still vibrant against the faded surroundings. The gold-trimmed horses gleamed as if they had been polished yesterday, their painted eyes seeming almost lifelike. The wooden platform was free of dust, the mirrors unbroken, reflecting the ghostly remnants of a world long forgotten. My pulse quickened as I stepped closer, drawn to the eerie perfection of it all. As I reached out to touch one of the horses, the air around me shifted. A faint melody began to play, the tinny chimes of a calliope winding to life. The soft glow of the carousel lights flickered on, casting warm golden hues across the empty park. The horses trembled as if waking from a long slumber, their hooves clicking against the wooden floor. My breath caught in my throat as I saw a figure perched on one of the horses, its back turned to me. The rider sat unnaturally still, their hands gripping the carved pole. A slow creak filled the silence as the carousel began to move, the platform rotating with deliberate, measured speed. The figure remained motionless, their long, tattered clothing swaying gently with the movement. I took a hesitant step closer, my heart hammering against my ribs. The figure's posture was rigid, their head tilted slightly downward as if deep in thought. The wind picked up, sending a sharp chill through the air. Yet the scent of perfume, something floral and sickly sweet, reached my nose. The carousel turned once more, and as the figure came into view again, I saw their face. Or rather, the lack of one. The figure's skin was smooth and featureless, a blank expanse where eyes, a nose, and a mouth should have been. A shudder crawled down my spine as I stumbled back, my pulse roaring in my ears. The faceless rider did not move, did not acknowledge my presence, only continued its endless loop on the spinning carousel. The music grew louder, the once soft melody now sharp and discordant. The lights flickered erratically, casting elongated shadows that seemed to reach for me. The horses' painted eyes gleamed in the shifting glow, their expressions twisting into something almost sinister. The air grew thick, suffocating, pressing against me like an unseen force urging me to run. I turned sharply, my instinct screaming at me to leave, but my feet felt rooted to the spot. The carousel was moving faster now, the horses rising and falling with unnatural fluidity. The faceless figure shifted, its head tilting slightly in my direction. Though it had no eyes, I felt its gaze, heavy and unrelenting, boring into me. Summoning every ounce of willpower, I forced myself to move, stumbling backward until I was nearly sprinting. The melody twisted into a shrill, haunting wail, echoing through the abandoned park. The wind howled through the empty stalls, whipping through the trees. And yet the carousel remained untouched, its lights glowing like a beacon in the darkness. I reached the rusted entrance gate, my breath coming in ragged gasps. When I dared to look back, the carousel had slowed, its once frantic pace now eerily calm. The music softened, returning to its gentle, welcoming tune. The faceless figure was gone, the horse it had occupied now empty. The park stretched out in eerie silence, as if nothing had happened. The distant roller coaster still stood in its ruined state. The game booths remained lifeless, and the Ferris wheel loomed in the distance, frozen in time. Yet the carousel continued its slow, endless rotation, its Calliope song a whisper against the wind. I fumbled for my phone, desperate to capture proof of what I had seen, but the screen remained black, refusing to power on. The air grew colder, the scent of decayed flowers still lingering, wrapping around me like a warning. I swallowed hard, backing away until my foot hit the cracked pavement of the main road. Something told me not to turn my back as I left, to keep my eyes fixed on the carousel until I was safely away. I obeyed that instinct, watching as the golden horses bobbed up and down, their polished bodies glinting in the dim light. My chest tightened as a new figure appeared on the platform, stepping onto one of the horses. A slow dread crept through me as I recognized the shape, the familiar tilt of the head, the way the figure gripped the pole. It was me. A perfect replica, down to the jacket I wore, the sneakers on my feet. The figure sat stiffly, staring forward, waiting for the ride to begin again. I staggered back, my mind struggling to comprehend what I was seeing. The music swelled once more, cheerful and bright, masking the suffocating horror settling in my gut. The lights glowed warmly, beckoning, inviting, as the carousel began to turn once again. My doppelganger remained frozen, trapped within the cycle, its presence an undeniable truth. I didn't wait to see more. I turned and ran, the weight of the air growing heavier with each step I took. The park seemed endless, the pathways twisting and shifting as if trying to keep me within its grasp. The wind carried the Calliope's eerie tune, following me long after I had reached my car. When I finally reached the highway, the park disappeared into the darkness, swallowed by the trees. My hands trembled as I gripped the wheel, my mind racing with what I had witnessed. The lingering scent of old perfume clung to my clothes, a chilling reminder that I had not imagined any of it. As I drove away, the carousel's music echoed faintly in the distance, playing just for me. I didn't look back, afraid that if I did, I would see my own reflection still riding, still trapped, still waiting for someone else to take my place. Story 19. The hospital stood at the edge of town, its windows shattered, its walls covered in creeping vines. The entrance doors hung open, swaying slightly in the wind as if inviting me inside. The air smelled of dust and decay, the scent of abandonment thick and cloying. I stepped through the doorway, my footsteps echoing against the tiled floor. The lobby was in ruins, chairs overturned, papers scattered across the ground. A broken gurney rested against the wall, its wheels rusted, its mattress stained with something dark. The overhead lights had long since failed, leaving only the dim glow of the evening sun filtering through the broken windows. The deeper I moved into the hospital, the darker it became. Each hallway stretched endlessly, lined with doors that led to patient rooms frozen in time. Some rooms still had beds, their sheets crumpled as if someone had just left. Rusted IV stands stood in corners, their tubes hanging limp like veins drained of life. Faded posters on the walls depicted outdated medical procedures, their colors dulled with age. A faint creaking sound echoed through a corridor, the source unknown. I hesitated, listening, but the silence quickly swallowed the noise. I continued forward, drawn by the mystery of this forgotten place, my curiosity outweighing my unease. At the end of the hallway, I found a door slightly ajar. A faint draft carried the scent of old paper from within. I pushed the door open and stepped inside, my eyes adjusting to the dim glow of the setting sun casting long shadows across the room. Rows of metal filing cabinets lined the walls, their drawers partially open. Stacks of medical charts and patient files were scattered across desks and chairs, some lying on the floor as if hastily abandoned. The air was thick with the scent of aged paper and mildew. I picked up a chart from the nearest stack, flipping through pages filled with medical jargon and handwritten notes. The names meant nothing to me, just strangers who had once been patients here. I moved to another desk, scanning the records absent-mindedly. Then, my fingers froze. My name was printed at the top of a file, my full name in bold letters. My heart pounded as I lifted the chart, my hands trembling slightly. The paper felt brittle, yet the ink was sharp, as though it had been written recently. The listed symptoms were unfamiliar, foreign to my body. Memory loss, unexplained blackouts, hallucinations, insomnia. I read the words over and over, but they made no sense. I had never experienced any of these things. Flipping through the pages, I found detailed observations, some marked with dates that made my stomach tighten. Dates from years ago, dates from months ago, a date from last week. I hadn't been here before. Had I? I turned to the last page, where a final note had been scribbled in hurried handwriting. Subject continues to return despite treatment. No recollection of previous visits. My breath caught in my throat. The words blurred as a cold sweat broke over my skin. A metallic clang echoed from the hallway, making me jump. I spun toward the door, clutching the file tightly. The corridor was empty, but the sound of footsteps soon followed, slow and deliberate. Someone or something was moving closer. I placed the file back on the desk, careful to leave it exactly as I had found it. My pulse pounded in my ears as I backed toward the door, straining to hear. The footsteps paused just beyond the threshold, followed by a low whisper. The voice was too soft to make out, but the tone was familiar. It sent an icy sensation crawling up my spine. I pressed myself against the wall, holding my breath. The whispering stopped. A moment passed, stretching unbearably long. Then the footsteps resumed, moving away this time. The tension in my chest eased slightly, but the fear remained. I had to get out. I stepped into the hallway, scanning both directions before hurrying toward the exit. The building felt different now, as if it had come alive in my presence. The walls seemed to pulse, the shadows stretching unnaturally. The silence had weight, pressing against me, thick and suffocating. As I neared the lobby, I caught movement in the corner of my eye. A figure stood at the far end of the hall, just beyond the reach of the fading sunlight. My breath hitched as I tried to make out its features, but the shadows obscured its face. It didn't move. It only watched. A cold dread seeped into my bones as I forced myself to look away and keep moving. The doors were in sight now, my escape just a few steps away. The moment I crossed the threshold, the air shifted. The scent of dust and decay disappeared, replaced by something sterile. The hum of fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. I turned back, but the hospital was no longer in ruins. The walls were clean, the floors polished. The lobby was full of people, patients, nurses, doctors. A nurse approached, her face unreadable. "You wandered off again," she said softly, taking my arm. "Let's get you back to your room." My body stiffened as I looked down at myself. A hospital gown clung to my skin. Panic surged through me as I pulled away, but the faces around me blurred. The walls seemed to pulse, shifting between the decayed building and the pristine hospital. My vision wavered, reality slipping between two conflicting truths. The nurse's grip tightened. "You always come back," she murmured, guiding me forward. My voice caught in my throat, the questions choking me. I turned one last time, looking back at the lobby doors. The decayed hospital flickered back for a second, the ruined walls and shattered windows reappearing. The stack of medical charts remained undisturbed on the desk where I had left them, and on the top of the pile my file sat open. The last note had changed. "You never leave. La." Story 20. The motel stood alone on the side of a forgotten highway, its neon sign long since burned out. The windows were clouded with grime, and the paint peeled from the walls in long, curling strips. I had driven past it countless times, always feeling a strange pull toward the empty parking lot. That day, curiosity finally won, and I found myself stepping out of my car, staring at the darkened entrance. The front doors hung slightly ajar, the hinges rusted and creaking as I pushed them open. The lobby smelled of mildew and dust, the scent of time settling into every surface. Faded chairs sat in the corners, their upholstery torn and stuffing spilling out like exposed wounds. The reception desk was covered in a thick layer of dust, untouched for years. As I moved through the lobby, my footsteps echoed down the empty hallways. The air was still, heavy with the absence of life, yet something about the silence felt unnatural. Doors lined both sides of the corridor, most of them ajar, revealing dark rooms filled with broken furniture. It was clear no one had stayed here in years. I continued down the hallway until I reached a door that stood slightly open. Something about it felt different. There was no dust on the handle, no cobwebs in the corners. I hesitated for a moment before pushing it open, my breath catching in my throat as I stepped inside. The room was clean, unnaturally so, as if someone had just finished tidying up. The bed was made with crisp white sheets, the pillows fluffed as if expecting a guest. A chair sat neatly in the corner, a small lamp beside it casting a soft glow. The air smelled faintly of cleaning supplies, a stark contrast to the decay outside. It was impossible no one had been here, yet the room looked as if it had been prepared just for me. Then, I saw the nightstand. A single key rested on top, its brass surface gleaming under the dim light. I stepped closer, my heart pounding as I reached for it. The tag attached to the key was old, the leather worn and cracked, but the name etched into it was unmistakable, my own. I swallowed hard, my fingers tightening around the key as I struggled to make sense of it. No one knew I was here. No one should have known my name. The logical part of my mind told me it was a coincidence, a forgotten relic from someone who shared my name. But deep down, I knew better. A sudden noise made me freeze. The sound of footsteps echoed faintly from somewhere down the hall, slow and deliberate. I turned sharply, my breath caught in my chest. The hallway had been empty when I arrived, but now the shadows seemed to shift, pressing in closer. I backed toward the door, my pulse hammering in my ears. The air felt heavier, charged with something unseen yet undeniably present. The walls, the furniture, even the floor beneath my feet seemed to hold their breath, waiting. I clenched the key in my hand, unsure whether to stay or run. The footsteps grew louder, drawing nearer with every passing second. I stepped into the hallway, my body tense, scanning the corridor for any sign of movement. The motel had been silent before, but now it felt alive, watching me, waiting for me to react. A flickering light at the far end of the hall drew my attention. The bulb above one of the doors buzzed, casting brief flashes of illumination on the peeling wallpaper. The door beneath it was different from the others, untouched by dust or decay. My name was scrawled across it in faded letters. My stomach twisted, my grip on the key tightening. The hallway stretched long before me, but I found myself moving toward the door, despite every warning in my mind. The air grew colder the closer I got, the buzzing light above humming louder. I reached the door and hesitated. The key in my hand felt warm, almost pulsing against my palm. I could hear my own breathing, uneven and shallow, as I slid the key into the lock. It turned smoothly, as if it had been waiting for me. The door creaked open, revealing a room identical to the one I had just left. The same neatly made bed, the same chair in the corner, the same dim lamp casting a dull glow. But this time there was something else. A notebook lay open on the desk, its pages filled with handwriting that looked eerily familiar. I stepped inside, my fingers tracing the pages as I read. The words detailed my arrival, my movements through the motel, even my hesitation before unlocking the door. It was impossible, yet there it was, recorded as if someone had been watching me from the moment I stepped inside. A sudden gust of wind slammed the door shut behind me, making me jump. The lamp flickered, casting shifting shadows against the walls. My own name was scrawled across the last page of the notebook, followed by a single sentence. You were always meant to return. My breath caught, a cold dread settling into my bones. I turned toward the door, my fingers fumbling for the handle, but it wouldn't budge. The air felt thick, pressing in on me as the shadows seemed to stretch and reach. The footsteps returned, this time right outside the door. Slow, deliberate, circling. My pulse pounded as I stepped away, my back hitting the wall. The air smelled different now, not of cleaning supplies, but of something old, something decayed. Then the handle turned. The door creaked open an inch, revealing only darkness beyond. I didn't wait to see what was there. I lunged forward, shoving the door with all my strength and running into the hallway. The flickering light above buzzed violently, casting erratic flashes that made the shadows seem to shift and twist. I didn't stop. I ran past the empty rooms, past the reception desk, and straight through the front doors. The cold night air hit me like a wave, but I didn't look back. My car was still in the lot, its presence a grounding force in the madness. I fumbled with my keys, my hands shaking as I unlocked the door and slid inside. The motel loomed in the rearview mirror, its windows black and empty. But as I turned the ignition, something caught my eye movement in one of the windows. A figure stood in the second-floor room, watching. The headlights illuminated the building as I sped away, but the figure never moved. It only stood there, staring, as if it had been expecting me all along. Story 21. The abandoned building loomed ahead, its skeletal frame barely holding together against the elements. The windows were shattered, jagged edges glinting in the pale light of the setting sun. Vines crawled up the cracked brick walls, their tendrils snaking through the gaps where time had worn the structure thin. The air was thick with dust, carrying the faint scent of mildew and decay. I stepped inside, my boots crunching against debris scattered across the floor. The remnants of a once functional space lay in ruin, broken chairs, rusted metal beams and fragments of old posters curling at the edges. Faded graffiti lined the walls, messages from people who had passed through before me. The silence was deep, pressing against my ears like a weight I couldn't shake. The building had once been an office complex, long abandoned after a fire had gutted the upper floors. The lower levels remained mostly intact, though time had stripped them of anything useful. My flashlight flickered against the walls as I moved deeper inside, my breath slow and measured. I wasn't supposed to be here, but something about the place called to me. As I wandered through the corridors, the sound of my own footsteps echoed eerily. The floor was uneven, with deep cracks running through the cement like veins. The remnants of old cubicles stood in skeletal rows, their partitions stained and crumbling. Papers, yellowed and brittle, littered the ground, their words faded beyond recognition. A faint creak sounded behind me, like weight shifting against the aging floorboards. I stopped, holding my breath, my pulse quickening. Slowly, I turned my head, scanning the corridor I had just walked through. Nothing moved. The air remained still, heavy with dust motes floating in the dim light. I exhaled, convincing myself it was the building settling. Yet as I took another step forward, the sound came again, soft but deliberate, a second set of footsteps echoing mine. A cold wave of unease crawled up my spine, tightening around my ribs like an invisible hand. I turned sharply, my flashlight cutting through the darkness. The hallway behind me was empty, but something had changed. A single piece of paper lay on the ground, directly in my path. It hadn't been there before. My stomach twisted as I crouched to pick it up, the brittle edges crumbling slightly between my fingers. The message was scrawled in shaky handwriting, the ink smudged as if written in haste. "Stop following me." A chill swept through me, my skin prickling as if unseen eyes were watching. I swallowed hard, my grip tightening around the paper. The note made no sense. I wasn't following anyone, I was alone. The rational part of my mind insisted it was a prank, something left behind by another trespasser. But deep inside, a heavier fear settled, pressing against my ribs. I took a step back, suddenly aware of how deep I had wandered into the building. The walls felt closer now, the shadows stretching longer than they should. My flashlight flickered, casting erratic beams against the decaying walls. Another creak sounded, closer this time, as if someone or something was just beyond my line of sight. The air shifted, carrying a faint whisper that I couldn't quite make out. My breath caught, my heart beat a thunderous drum against my chest. I turned, my flashlight sweeping the corridor, but all I found were more broken cubicles, their contents long forgotten. The weight of the silence felt heavier now, as if the very air around me had thickened. I needed to leave. The realization struck hard, pushing past my curiosity and replacing it with something primal. I turned on my heel, quickening my pace as I retraced my steps toward the exit. The distant hum of the outside world felt impossibly far away, muffled by the building's lifeless interior. The footsteps behind me returned, louder this time, matching my pace. My pulse spiked as I broke into a near run, my breath coming in shallow gasps. The flashlight trembled in my grip, its beam swinging wildly as I darted through the ruined halls. Every door I passed seemed darker, each corner more suffocating. A sudden gust of air rushed past me, strong enough to send a stack of old papers fluttering into the air. I skidded to a stop, my back pressing against a rusted filing cabinet. The papers settled slowly, drifting like leaves, revealing another note among them. The same handwriting, the same uneven strokes. "You're not supposed to be here." A sharp ringing filled my ears, drowning out my own panic breathing. The words swam before my eyes, burning themselves into my mind. The air around me grew colder, pressing in from all sides. My instincts screamed at me to move, to get out before it was too late. I forced myself forward, my legs unsteady beneath me. The exit was close now. I could see the faint glow of the outside world spilling through the doorway. My fingers tightened around the flashlight as I pushed forward, my breath a ragged whisper in the stillness. Just as I reached the doorway, a final note lay on the threshold, perfectly centered as if someone had placed it there just moments ago. My hand trembled as I picked it up, my pulse hammering beneath my skin. The message was different this time. "Next time, I won't let you leave." The word sent an icy terror through my veins. I didn't wait. I bolted out of the building, my footsteps pounding against the pavement as I put as much distance between myself and that place as possible. The night air felt thin, the stars above distant and indifferent. I didn't look back. I didn't dare. But even as I reached my car, fumbling with the keys, I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. The notes had found me in that building, appearing when they shouldn't have. And the last message lingered in my mind, a quiet, unspoken threat. As I drove away, the headlights illuminating the cracked road ahead, a final thought crept into my mind, one that refused to be silenced. What if I had been the one following all along? What if something had been leading me deeper, guiding me to where it wanted me to go? And what if, next time, I wouldn't be able to escape? Story 22. The fire station had been abandoned for years, its brick walls worn by time and neglect. Windows were broken, their jagged edges letting in beams of late afternoon light. The front doors hung open, creaking with each passing breeze. I had always been curious about places like this, structures left behind, filled with echoes of the past. Inside, the air was thick with dust and the faint scent of smoke. Rows of old lockers lined the walls, their paint peeling, some doors left ajar. A long row of rusted hooks still held tattered fire hoses, their fabric stiff with age. The garage where the fire trucks once sat was empty, save for a few scattered tools and a rusted axe leaning against the wall. I moved cautiously through the space, my footsteps muffled by debris. Old calendars and notices still clung to bulletin boards, their pages yellowed and curling. A table in the corner held empty coffee mugs, as if the firefighters had simply walked away one day and never returned. There was a strange stillness in the air, as if the building itself was waiting for something. The locker room was dimly lit, the fluorescent lights overhead long dead. I ran my fingers over the cool metal of the lockers, reading the faded names etched onto each door. Some were dented, others rusted shut, but one stood slightly ajar, its handle clean, as if it had been touched recently. Inside, a fireman's uniform hung neatly on a metal hanger. The fabric, though aged, looked untouched by time. The boots beneath it were polished, their laces tied in perfect loops. It didn't make sense. Everything else in the station was in decay, yet this uniform looked ready for duty. I hesitated before reaching out, my fingers grazing the heavy fabric. The moment I touched it, a shrill alarm erupted through the station, a deafening wail that sent my heart into my throat. The sound bounced off the empty walls, filling every inch of space. I stumbled back, my pulse hammering. The alarm was impossible. There was no electricity, no working system that should have triggered it. Yet it blared, as if the station had suddenly come to life. Then, beneath the shriek of the siren, I heard something else. Footsteps. They were heavy, deliberate, moving somewhere beyond the locker room. My breath caught as I turned toward the doorway, but the hallway beyond was empty. The alarms continued, pulsing through the station like a heartbeat. I clenched my fists, forcing myself to stay calm, but every instinct screamed for me to leave. The footsteps grew closer, slow, methodical, as if someone was searching. My stomach twisted as I backed against the lockers, pressing myself into the shadows. I didn't want to believe it, but I wasn't alone. Then, the alarms cut off. Silence crashed down like a wave, making my ears ring. The sudden stillness was worse than the noise. I strained to listen, my breathing shallow. The footsteps had stopped. I took a cautious step forward, peering out into the hallway. Nothing moved, but the feeling of being watched was suffocating. My gaze flicked back to the uniform, still hanging neatly where I had found it. Something about it felt wrong, like I had disturbed something that should have been left alone. A soft shuffle sounded from the garage. I swallowed hard, forcing my feet to move. The hallway stretched ahead, the doors on either side gaping open like dark mouths. I kept my steps light, my pulse pounding in my ears. When I reached the garage, I froze. The rusted axe that had been leaning against the wall was gone. My breath hitched as I scanned the space, my hands curling into fists. Someone had taken it. A whisper of movement came from behind one of the fire trucks. My muscles tensed as I edged forward, every nerve in my body screaming to turn and run. The truck's door was slightly open, its interior lost in shadow. I could feel the presence of someone or something just beyond my sight. The air was thick, heavy with something unseen. My fingers itched to grab something, anything that could serve as a weapon. But before I could move, a sound cut through the silence. A voice. Low, raspy, and unmistakably human. "Why are you here?" I turned sharply, but the space was empty. The words had come from nowhere, yet they lingered, curling around me like smoke. My skin prickled as I took a slow step back, my heart hammering. Then, the fire truck's door creaked open wider. I didn't wait to see what was inside. My feet finally obeyed the primal urge to flee, and I bolted down the hallway. The station seemed larger now, the shadows deeper, the exits further away. Every step sent dust swirling into the air, but I didn't dare slow down. As I reached the front doors, a deep, guttural laugh echoed behind me. It wasn't amused, it was knowing, like something had been expecting me. I burst into the open air, my lungs burning. The fire station loomed behind me, its dark windows watching. I didn't stop running until I reached my car, fumbling with the keys, my hands slick with sweat. As I sped away, I glanced once in the rearview mirror. The station was still there, silent and unmoving. But in one of the upstairs windows, a figure stood watching, its silhouette barely visible in the fading light. I never went back, but sometimes late at night I still hear the alarm ringing, and I still wonder what would have happened if I had stayed. Story 23. The school had been abandoned for years, left to decay under the weight of time. Windows were shattered, their jagged remains glinting in the weak afternoon light. The air smelled of mildew and dust, thick with the scent of rotting wood. I had always been drawn to places like this, forgotten and silent, their history lingering in the walls like a whisper. Stepping inside, I felt the temperature drop, the stagnant air wrapping around me like a heavy blanket. My footsteps echoed in the empty halls, bouncing off peeling paint and rusted lockers. Faint traces of old posters clung to the walls, their messages long faded and unreadable. Desks were overturned in some classrooms, while others looked eerily untouched, as if waiting for students who would never return. I moved deeper into the building, drawn to the silence that felt too thick, too intentional. Each creak of the floorboard sent a shiver up my spine, my breath coming slower as I reached a door at the end of the hall. It was smaller than the others, nearly hidden behind a collapsed bookshelf. The wood was warped with moisture, but when I pushed against it, it gave way with a groan. The air inside was heavy, thick with the scent of something old and forgotten. My flashlight flickered as I stepped in, illuminating walls lined with empty shelves and crumbling books. Dust swirled in the beam of light, disturbed by my presence. At the far end of the room, a large chalkboard covered an entire wall, its surface scratched and faded. As I stepped closer, my breath caught in my throat. Written in large, uneven letters across the board was my name. The handwriting was jagged, almost frantic, as if someone had scrawled it with a trembling hand. The chalk dust still clung to the surface, fresh, as if the words had been written moments before I arrived. My stomach twisted as I took a step back, my pulse hammering in my ears. No one should have known I was here. No one should have written my name in a school that had been abandoned for decades. I turned quickly, scanning the room for any sign of movement, any indication that I wasn't alone. The silence pressed against me, thick and suffocating. My flashlight flickered again, the shadows stretching unnaturally against the walls. A soft scraping sound echoed from the far side of the room, like chalk against a board. My blood ran cold as I turned back toward the chalkboard. There, just beneath my name, a new line was forming. The chalk moved on its own, pressing into the surface with slow, deliberate strokes. My throat tightened as the message became clear. I see you. A chill crawled up my spine, my feet frozen in place. The air in the room grew heavier, charged with something unseen but unmistakably present. My flashlight dimmed, casting weak, trembling light as the chalk clattered to the floor. The room fell into stillness again, but the feeling of being watched lingered, pressing against my skin. I took a shaky breath, forcing myself to move. I had to get out, had to leave before whatever was in this room decided to show itself. As I turned toward the door, the floor beneath me groaned, the sound stretching into something unnatural. A shadow moved in the corner of my vision, just beyond the reach of my light. My breath hitched, my pulse hammering in my ears. I didn't want to look. didn't want to acknowledge whatever was creeping at the edge of my sight. But the longer I stood there, the more the air felt wrong, thick with something unseen but watching. Slowly, I turned my head, my flashlight beam trembling as it swept across the room. Nothing was there. Just empty shelves, crumbling books, and the chalkboard with my name etched into it. Yet the feeling of being watched refused to fade, clinging to my skin like a second layer. My fingers tightened around the flashlight as I took another step toward the door. Then, just behind me, the whisper of chalk against the board began again. My muscles tensed, every instinct screaming at me to run, but I couldn't help myself. I turned, my flashlight beam landing on the board just as another message formed beneath the last. "Don't go." My breath caught, a cold sweat breaking across my skin. The message was written with the same frantic, unsteady hand, the letters pressed deep into the dusty surface. My legs felt heavy, the air pressing down as the temperature dropped further. The room seemed smaller now, the walls closer, the silence almost humming with unseen energy. Something wasn't right. A sharp noise echoed from the doorway, a scraping shuffle against the floor. My chest tightened as I swung the flashlight toward the sound. The beam caught the edge of a shadow, too tall, too still, lingering just outside the doorway. My stomach lurched as the shadow twitched, then moved. I didn't stay to see more. My feet finally obeyed me, carrying me toward the hall as fast as they could. I shoved through the doorway, my breath ragged, my heart slamming in my chest. The school around me suddenly felt darker, the walls pressing in, the air thick with something unseen but unmistakably present. I didn't stop running until I reached the front doors. My hands fumbled against the rusted handle before finally wrenching it open. The moment I stepped outside, the weight lifted, the air no longer thick and suffocating. But the feeling of being watched didn't leave. As I stood there, catching my breath, I glanced back through the broken window. The hallway was empty, the shadows still. But just before I turned away, I saw it. A figure standing in the dark, just beyond the reach of the light. It didn't move, it didn't speak, but somehow I knew it was smiling. Story 24. The woods had always intrigued me, their silence both calming and unnerving. I had been hiking for hours, following a barely visible trail that twisted deeper into the wilderness. The further I went, the more isolated I felt, the towering trees enclosing me in their shadowy embrace. That was when I spotted a cabin, nestled among the trees like a forgotten relic. It looked abandoned, its walls weathered and roof sagging slightly under the weight of time. The windows were clouded with dust, and the front door hung slightly ajar, creaking as the wind nudged it. Curiosity gnawed at me, urging me forward despite the unease creeping up my spine. I hesitated for only a moment before stepping onto the porch, the wood groaning under my weight. Pushing the door open, I peered inside, half expecting to find nothing but decay. Instead, a wave of warmth greeted me, thick with the scent of burning wood. My eyes locked onto the fireplace at the far end of the room, where embers still glowed faintly, curling tendrils of smoke into the air. A fire had been burning recently. Someone had been here. My pulse quickened as I scanned the room, my breath catching when I noticed the chair beside the hearth. The fabric was slightly depressed, as if someone had just been sitting there. My heart pounded in my chest as I took a step closer, my boots stirring the dust that coated the wooden floor. Whoever had been here had left only moments ago. The air felt charged, thick with an unseen presence that made the hairs on my arms stand on end. I swallowed hard, my fingers tightening around the straps of my backpack. The rest of the cabin appeared untouched. Cobwebs clung to the ceiling, dust coated the furniture, and the kitchen shelves were bare. Yet the fire told a different story. Someone had been here recently enough that the warmth still lingered. I turned toward the door, suddenly aware of how vulnerable I was. The wind howled outside, rattling the loose window panes. But beneath it, I swore I heard something else. Footsteps. My breath hitched as I strained to listen, my body frozen in place. They were faint but deliberate, moving somewhere just beyond the cabin. Panic surged through me, my instincts screaming at me to leave. I took a cautious step back, my gaze flicking to the fireplace once more. The embers had dimmed, but the unsettling evidence remained. Someone had been here, and they might still be nearby. I forced myself to move toward the door, my every step careful, deliberate. As I reached for the doorknob, a loud creak echoed from the porch. My blood ran cold. I wasn't alone. I turned my head slowly, my eyes locking onto the narrow window beside the door. Through the grimy glass, I saw movement, a shadow shifting just out of sight. My pulse roared in my ears as I took another step back, my mind racing. Whoever was out there wasn't making their presence known. They were waiting. The thought sent a chill down my spine, my grip tightening around my flashlight. If they wanted to confront me, they would have by now. The silence stretched, thick and suffocating, each second dragging on endlessly. Then, another sound, this time behind the cabin. I spun around, my breath coming in short, panicked gasps. The back door, barely visible in the dim light, remained closed, but the unmistakable crunch of leaves came from just beyond it. Someone was circling the cabin. My stomach twisted as I realized they were trying to trap me inside. I needed to move, now. Now. With a burst of adrenaline, I lunged for the front door, yanking it open with trembling hands. The cold night air hit me like a slap. But I didn't stop. I bolted down the porch steps, my boots pounding against the earth as I sprinted into the trees. The branches clawed at my arms, the darkness swallowing me whole. Behind me, the cabin stood in eerie silence, its door still ajar, the fire still smoldering. I didn't dare look back. The feeling of being watched clung to me, heavy and oppressive, like unseen eyes tracking my every move. My lungs burned as I pushed forward, my only goal to put as much distance between myself and that cabin as possible. The further I ran, the more the night seemed to close in around me. The wind howled through the trees, masking any sound of pursuit. My legs ached, my breath came in ragged gasps, but I refused to slow down. Only when I reached the familiar trailhead did I finally stop, doubling over as I tried to catch my breath. For a long moment I stood there, listening, waiting. The forest remained silent, save for the rustling of leaves in the wind. Had I imagined it? Had my mind twisted the situation into something far more sinister than it was? I wanted to believe that, but the memory of that fire, of that chair still warm from someone's presence, told me otherwise. I never went back to that part of the woods. Whatever had been in that cabin, whoever had been watching me, I wasn't willing to find out. The experience lingered in the back of my mind, an unsettling reminder of the things that lurked in the quiet places of the world. Some places were abandoned for a reason. Some fires were never meant to be found. Story 25. The old cinema stood at the edge of town, hidden behind overgrown trees and rusted fencing. Its marquee was faded, the letters long gone, leaving only a skeleton of its former self. The front doors were slightly ajar, as if inviting me in, despite the years of neglect. Inside, dust hung in the air, disturbed by my every step. Rows of seats stretched before me, their upholstery torn and faded, but otherwise untouched. The screen at the front was cracked, the heavy curtains framing it stiff with age. The scent of stale popcorn and mildew lingered, remnants of a past long abandoned. I made my way toward the back, past the concession stand with its shattered glass and rusted soda machines. A narrow staircase led up to the projection room, its wooden steps groaning under my weight. The closer I got, the more I felt an odd warmth in the air, unnatural in a place left to rot. At the top, the door was slightly open, and a faint whirring noise came from within. I hesitated, my pulse quickening as I stepped inside. The room was cramped, lined with metal shelves holding reels of film, some still labeled with titles I didn't recognize. The projector was running. The reels spun, flickering images onto the glass window that overlooked the theater below. A film played on the cracked screen, the faint sound of static-laced audio whispering through the space. My eyes adjusted to the dim light, and that's when I saw it. On the screen, a lone figure sat in one of the theater seats. The image was grainy, distorted with age, but the shape was unmistakable. The person on the screen was wearing my clothes, sitting in the exact row I had just walked past. My breath caught in my throat as I stepped closer. The film's perspective shifted, the camera angle tilting slightly as if someone were behind it, recording. The person in the seat me tilted their head, looking toward the projection room. My stomach twisted as I turned sharply, expecting to see something standing behind me. The room was empty. The only movement was the film still playing, the reel clicking softly as it spun. I looked back at the screen, my pulse hammering. The version of me on the film stood up, slowly turning to face the camera. My knees felt weak, my skin cold despite the strange warmth in the room. The film had to be old, years old, yet it showed me, in real time, reacting to what I was seeing. The distorted audio crackled again, and though I could barely make out the words, I swore I heard my own voice whispering something. A sudden noise echoed through the theater below, a faint creak like footsteps on old wood. My breath hitched as I peered through the projection window, but the rows of seats were empty. The film continued playing, the version of me frozen in place, staring directly at the camera. I needed to leave. My hands trembled as I reached for the projector, my fingers brushing against its rusted surface. The second I touched it, the film cut to static, the whirring of the reels slowing to a stop. The room was deathly silent now, save for my own ragged breathing. A shadow flickered across the glass window, moving in the empty theater below. I pulled back instantly, my heart slamming against my ribs. The seats were still empty, but something had moved. I wasn't alone. I bolted for the door, my hands fumbling against the rusted handle. The air behind me felt heavy, pressing against my back like unseen hands. I yanked the door open and stumbled down the stairs, the sound of my own footsteps drowned out by the pounding in my ears. The moment I reached the lobby, the dim lights flickered overhead. The scent of mildew and dust thickened, the walls seeming to close in. I pushed through the front doors, gasping as the cold night air hit me like a slap. Turning back, I expected to see the theater as I had found it, decayed, lifeless. Instead, for a brief moment, the marquee lights flickered, casting a faint glow against the darkness. The cracked glass doors reflected the faintest image of a figure standing just inside, watching. I didn't wait to see more. I ran until the theater was out of sight. The memory of my own face on that screen burned into my mind. The film had shown me sitting there watching, but if I hadn't been the one recorded, who had been? Story 26. The entrance to the abandoned zoo was rusted shut, but the chain securing it had long since been cut. Pushing it open, I stepped inside, the wind carrying the faint scent of damp earth and decay. The pathways were cracked, overtaken by creeping vines and weeds. Empty enclosures lined both sides, their fences sagging under the weight of time. The remnants of faded signs still clung to the posts, their words barely legible. One read "Big Cat's Exhibit," pointing toward a path swallowed by overgrown branches. Another sign, its paint peeling, listed the feeding times for animals that no longer remained. The silence was unsettling, broken only by the occasional rustling of leaves. I wandered deeper, my footsteps crunching against scattered debris. A broken bench sat near what used to be a snack stand, its window shattered, the counter covered in dust. The place felt frozen, as if the world had simply moved on without it. It made me wonder why the zoo had closed so abruptly. I followed a winding path that led to the larger enclosures. The cages stood empty, their metal bars rusted but still sturdy. Some had remnants of old signs attached: wolf habitat, bear den, reptile house, each one a reminder of the creatures that once lived here. The eerie quiet made it feel like they had never left, only hidden. Then, ahead of me, I saw the largest enclosure. The metal bars stretched high, towering over me, forming a massive cage. The sign that once identified its occupant had been removed, leaving only an empty space. Something about it felt off, different from the others. Stepping closer, I peered inside. The ground was torn up, as if something had paced back and forth for years, wearing deep grooves into the dirt. The food trough sat overturned, rusted and empty. A heavy chain dangled from a post, snapped clean in half. Whatever had been inside, it hadn't left calmly. I ran my fingers along the bars, feeling the rough texture of the rusted metal. Then I noticed something scrawled into the bars, faint but deliberate. My breath hitched as I leaned in to read it. It's still out there. The words sent a chill down my spine. I took a step back, suddenly feeling exposed. The message wasn't old, the scratches in the metal were recent, the edges sharp and clean. Someone had carved it long after the zoo had closed. My eyes flicked to the broken chain, to the deep claw marks along the walls. A branch snapped behind me, the sound sharp in the stillness. I turned quickly, scanning the overgrown path, my pulse pounding. There was nothing, only the swaying of leaves in the breeze. Yet the sensation of being watched crept over me, pressing down like an invisible weight. I forced myself to breathe, my fingers gripping the strap of my backpack. Maybe it was just my imagination, the isolation playing tricks on me. But the message on the bars stayed burned in my mind. Someone had written it for a reason. I glanced back at the cage, at the snapped chain and deep claw marks. Whatever had been kept here, it hadn't belonged in a zoo. And if the warning was true, it wasn't gone. It was still somewhere nearby. Story 27. The abandoned hospital loomed ahead, its broken windows staring out like hollow eyes. Ivy curled around the crumbling walls, creeping through cracks where time had worn the building thin. The entrance was partially collapsed, but a side door hung loose on rusted hinges, swaying slightly in the cold night breeze. I hesitated for only a moment before stepping inside, the darkness swallowing me whole. The air was thick with the scent of mildew and something metallic, something almost like blood. The floor was littered with debris, fallen ceiling tiles, shattered glass, discarded papers yellowed with age. Every sound I made echoed eerily, bouncing off the walls as if the building itself was breathing around me. The distant creak of metal made me pause, but when nothing followed, I pressed on. Faded signs pointed toward different wings: pediatrics, emergency, operating theaters. My flashlight flickered slightly as I passed empty rooms, each one more unsettling than the last. Rusted gurneys sat in the middle of hallways, their wheels caked with grime. Peeling wallpaper curled away from the walls, revealing layers of decay hidden beneath. I turned a corner and found a door marked Operating Room 3. It stood slightly ajar, revealing a sliver of darkness beyond. My pulse quickened as I stepped closer, pushing it open with the edge of my hand. The hinges groaned in protest, the sound cutting through the silence like a warning. Inside, the air was different, colder, heavier. A single overhead lamp flickered above, casting sickly yellow light over the room. In the center stood an operating table, its metal surface gleaming under the weak glow. But it wasn't the table that made my stomach clench. It was the tray of surgical tools beside it. Scalpels, forceps, syringes, they were all arranged neatly, meticulously, as if someone had just prepared them for use. A thin layer of dust coated the countertops, but the tools were pristine, untouched by time. The positioning was deliberate, every instrument lined up with an unsettling precision. My breath hitched as I took an uneasy step closer. A clipboard rested at the foot of the table, the paper crisp despite the decay surrounding it. My fingers trembled as I picked it up, my eyes scanning the handwritten notes. It listed procedures, incisions, sutures, removal. But what made my blood run cold was the name scrawled at the top, my own. I dropped the clipboard, the sound too loud in the empty room. My chest tightened, my skin crawling with the overwhelming sense that I wasn't alone. The door behind me remained open, but the hallway beyond felt impossibly distant. The silence grew suffocating, pressing down on me from all sides. Then, a sound. Soft at first, barely more than a whisper of movement. My pulse pounded as I turned toward the source. The curtain in the far corner of the room swayed slightly, though there was no breeze. I forced myself to take a step back, my body screaming at me to run. A metallic clang rang out as one of the surgical tools slipped from the tray, landing with a sharp echo on the floor. I froze, my breath catching in my throat. The room felt different now, charged with something unseen, something waiting. The walls seemed to close in, the overhead light flickering more violently. I swallowed hard, inching toward the door, but a chill ran down my spine as I noticed something new. A chair sat just behind the operating table, its leather seat cracked with age. Restraints dangled from its arms, their buckles gleaming in the dim light. They were undone, as if someone had been waiting to fasten them. Panic surged through me, my heart beat a wild drum in my ears. I turned sharply and bolted for the hallway, my footsteps thundering against the tile. The corridor stretched ahead, seemingly endless, the shadows shifting as my flashlight danced across the walls. The air behind me felt heavy, as if something unseen was reaching out. As I neared the exit, a sudden sharp noise made me skid to a halt. A soft clicking sound, rhythmic, calculated like someone tapping metal against metal. I turned my head slightly, my body rigid with fear. At the far end of the hallway, just beyond the reach of my light, a figure stood motionless. My breath hitched as I tried to make out the details. A long coat draped over its thin frame, the edges tattered, swaying slightly as if caught in a non-existent breeze. The glint of something metallic flashed in its hand, reflecting my flashlight's weak beam. The tapping continued, deliberate and slow. I took a shaky step back, and the figure twitched. The motion was unnatural, jerky, as if it had been still for too long and was now remembering how to move. My body finally obeyed my instincts and I turned, sprinting toward the exit. The tapping stopped, replaced by the sound of hurried footsteps behind me. I pushed through the doorway, the night air slamming against my skin like a shock of ice. My legs carried me forward without thought, the rusted fence ahead barely registering in my panicked mind. I clambered over it, my hands slipping against the damp metal, my breath coming in ragged gasps. The moment my feet hit the ground on the other side, I turned back, expecting to see the figure standing just beyond the gate. But the doorway was empty, the hospital as lifeless as when I had first entered. The silence stretched out, unnerving and absolute. For a long moment I stood frozen, waiting for something to emerge from the darkness. But nothing did. The building remained still, as if it had swallowed the presence whole, leaving only its crumbling facade behind. But I knew what I had seen. And I knew it had seen me too. I stumbled back toward my car, my hands shaking as I fumbled with the keys. The engine roared to life, but I hesitated before driving away, my eyes locked onto the hospital in the rearview mirror. The broken windows reflected the night sky, empty and dark. Then, just before I pulled away, the faintest movement caught my eye. A curtain shifting behind one of the shattered panes. The tapping sound echoed once more, distant yet deliberate, as if reminding me that I had come too close. I pressed my foot to the gas, the hospital vanishing into the night behind me. But no matter how far I drove, I couldn't shake the feeling that something had followed me. And worse, that it was only waiting for the right moment to finish what it had started.